Astonishing Legends Network.
If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. You can call or text 988 or chat at 988lifeline.org in the U.S. and Canada. This service is free, confidential, and available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, providing support from certified crisis response professionals. For those outside North America, please contact your local emergency services or a regional crisis center immediately. Thanks to our sponsors and Patreon supporters, Astonishing Legends is free to listen to. We appreciate your support of them and us.
On the night of May 12, 1966, a powerful explosion shook the coastal town of Sojuo-de-Bar. The blast was loud enough to be heard over 6 miles or 10 kilometers away. It rattled the local police station and caused a panic inside a nearby movie theater, sending people running into the streets thinking they were experiencing an earthquake. The local police inspector on duty assumed an old, unexploded German naval mine had finally washed onto the reefs near the Atafona Beach lighthouse. He went down to the water to investigate. He found a deep, trench-like track gouged into the sand, roughly 14 inches wide. Hanging thick in the damp night air was the distinct, acrid smell of sulfur. It wasn't a naval mine. Sitting in a parked Jeep on a dead-end street near the beach that night were 3 men. They'd driven 25 miles, or 40 kilometers, from the city of Campos just to watch the sky. 2 of those men will be familiar to you from part 1 of our series. They were Miguel Jose Viana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz. What happened to them on Vintem Hill 3 months later wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't a spontaneous, poorly planned outing by 2 television repairmen who suddenly decided to experiment with hallucinogens. It was the culmination of an escalating pattern of behavior. A pattern built on clandestine ham radio transmissions, high-voltage electrical components, and an underground network of tech-obsessed spiritualists channeling entities for life advice. Zooming out from that specific clearing in 1966, the rest of the physical evidence starts to form a much darker pattern. There are reports of a homemade artifact detonating in Manuel's garden, scattering metal pipes and wires across the lawn. The discovery of an annotated book in their repair shop detailing the radioactive, disintegrating hulls of Martian spacecraft. And perhaps most unsettling of all, you find police records from 1962. 4 years before Miguel and Manuel climbed up Vintem Hill, another electronics technician named Hamish hiked up Cruzeiro Hill, just a few miles away. He went up there to conduct an unauthorized experiment to capture television signals without a receiver. He allegedly ingested a small, round pill to initiate the process. He was found dead on the summit, and lying next to his body was a crude, hand-hammered lead mask. Tonight, we're mapping out the steps that led these 2 men up that hill. We're looking at the underground spiritist groups influencing their experiments, and how a bungled forensic investigation may have permanently destroyed the only physical evidence that could have solved this case.
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Forrest Burgess.
We are creating something that will prevent the end of the world in 1968, when the Great Cyclone will devastate a large part of our planet. Miguel and Manuel to their neighbor, Fernando Jose.
Join us tonight for the final part of our series on the lead masks of Vintem Hill.
And we're...
Hey, you can't just cut it off like that.
Well, I didn't know if you noticed.
Yeah, we kind of stopped saying that for a minute. Did you even notice? Did you have a Mandela effect crisis?
I'm more curious about that.
I don't think anyone noticed. Did we get any emails or anything?
Well,
I don't think anybody said anything. Nobody cares, right?
No, but mispronounce and or were or back, and then you will get an email.
It kind of slipped by the wayside in our effort to tighten up the openings to the shows and get down to business earlier, but alas, we missed it. So now And we're back is back, at least for a minute. Anyway, first things first, we have to give a shout out to the absolute best source of information for this legend on the internet, which we did in part 1, but we want to do it again here in part 2.
Yeah, it turns out the author and publisher of that blog found out about this series, which I'm very curious about.
Yes.
How did he know? But anyway, he just sent us an email very kindly, literally about 2 hours ago as we're recording this.
Yes, Migueletto sent the following message to us. It said, hello, I have just listened to episode 327 of Astonishing Legends. And as the author of the blog, pmig96.wordpress.com, which we told you guys about in the last episode, I would like to commend you on your work. Very entertaining podcast indeed. I didn't realize until recently my contact information was missing from the front page. Strange, since it was there before. I have updated the page with this email address contact and also with my contact on X. Feel free to ping me anytime. Waiting for part 2. Regards, Migueletto. There is so much great info on his blog, folks. If you're super into this case, you've got to visit it. To that end, we've made a shortened link that will take you straight to the blog. It's tinyurl.com/leadmasks. tinyurl.com/leadmasks. When you get there, look around because he's got both a shorter version of the story and then a much more in-depth one. But even the short one is super detailed. So dive deep on that if you really want to get in the weeds on this astonishing legend. And one last quick note quickly before we get rolling. You should have heard it last week, but remember that this coming September, we are officially joining the lineup for the 2026 Wet Hot Bad Magic Summer Camp in September in Pennsylvania.
And it's going to be an incredible weekend lineup here. We're putting together a live show. Are you doing that for this one that digs deep into some of this? I see.
You
okay.
and me.
Well, I will provide. I did get a lot of the field material. I think that we might be talking about.
That's right.
So, anyway, it's some incredible off-mic moments from some of our investigations and different things we've not really talked about a whole lot. So we really want to see you there.
Yeah, if you want to check it out, visit badmagicproductions.com to get your tickets.
Alrighty then. Well, what do you have to start off with here?
Well, I mean, I know you wanted to talk about that alternate quote that we had for the opening, which we wound up kind of sliding down because it's mentioned in the cold open there, but it's pretty interesting, and it's, I guess, a controversial part of this case.
Indeed, and just so you know, folks, often we'll try and find a quote that kind of summarizes or gives you the gestalt of the vibe or feeling of the topic or genre we're covering, and just to kind of hear someone else's thoughts other than our own pithy insights. But I thought this one that we didn't use was pretty insightful. I like it because it gives it some authority and weight too, a little bit of gravitas, from people that were actually there investigating. Now, you can decide whether you like the method of the investigation or not, but the quote that we did not say at the front was, in 1962, right here in Niteroi, something similar to the death of the 2 men from Campos happened. A television technician, a Frenchman, was found dead on top of Cruzeiro Hill. And do you know what they found next to his body? A lead mask. And that quote came from José da Souza Arias, a local Niteroi resident who came forward to police in 1966 with the nearby Cruzeiro Hill precedent. So I know that we kind of mentioned that in the cold open, but that is more fully a statement from somebody who was there. Just the fact that okay, some other guys wanted up there, got a hold of the wrong baggie full of mushrooms or whatever, and expired. But the fact that there was also a lead masks, that's the point where you go, huh? What?
Well, we're actually going to talk about that a little bit here right at the top of the show, so that's the perfect time to bring it up. We're picking up the timeline here right after the discovery of Miguel and Manuel's bodies on Vintem Hill, but we actually need to rewind 4 years to understand the mechanics of what they were attempting to accomplish, and that takes us back to what Forrest was just talking about. During the 1966 investigation, that gentleman, José de Souza Arias, forgive me for murdering the pronunciation, approached the police with a story from 4 years earlier in 1962. This other guy, another television technician named Hermes, was also found dead on the summit of Cruzeiro Hill, which is not the same hill, but close enough. It's also located in Niteroi. Police found apparently no signs of violence on his body, but lying right next to him, there was supposedly a lead mask.
Okay, right. And so if that turns out to be accurate or true, then it changes the entire context of what happened to our guys here. Could they have been following a specific pre-existing blueprint for whatever ritual they were trying to do?
So that's what's fascinating here. So Hermès purportedly worked with a French electronics researcher. When this Frenchman went to the morgue for the autopsy, he told authorities that Hermès went up that hill to conduct an experiment to capture television channels without using any physical receiving equipment, which is pretty interesting. So to initiate the process, he allegedly swallowed a round pill with indentations around the edges, resembling the marks a cook might make with a fork on pastry dough. The Frenchman stated that Hermès died because his body wasn't physically prepared for the toll of the task.
Interesting. A little bit of spiritist Max Headroom action, possibly.
Yeah.
Altering or messing with TV radio signals without gear. But the question is, who was this mysterious Frenchman?
Well, that's the frustrating part. According to the original O Globo newspaper article from August of 1966, José de Souza Arias completely forgot the guy's name. It gets even muddier because when Manchetti magazine printed their version of the story a month later, they claimed the dead technician found on the hill was the Frenchman. But over the years, from our own research on the show, we've seen details like that get out of whack over and over when various papers are reprinting things. But the reality is the details here, they're completely fractured depending on which paper, where you pick up the story.
Yeah, not surprised there. That's kind of pretty common MO. There's some other strange things. I mean, the spelling, I suppose, in English is Hermes. So Hermes would be, and it's a real old-fashioned name, but there are folks named Hermes after the folks from antiquity. In French, it'd be MS. Of course, the French Hermes,
fashion.
The very French and very famous and expensive fashion house.
Yes,
it seems like it'd be more of a French name, but they're saying like, oh no, that was the guy that was on the hill, and the Frenchman reported it. So a little bit murky here.
Yeah,
but a little bit of background on these papers. Okay, as best we can tell from some cursory research, you have two competing publications in Brazil handling the narrative at the time. O Globo serves as the paper of record in Rio de Janeiro. I'm not going to get that ever right, so I'm just going to mash the Rio de Janeiro together.
Yeah, I think the day goes away. It's like
Rio de Janeiro. Anyway, that's a massive, influential daily broadsheet type of paper. And when they print an article, it's generally considered well-vetted and trustworthy. But then you have Manchete, which in Spanish would be Manchete. Think of it as the Brazilian equivalent to Life magazine, so something of that caliber. It's a premium weekly publication relying on glossy, high-quality photojournalism. Manchete printed José de Souza Arias' quote in September of 1966, which is how the 1962 Cruzeiro Hill precedent caught fire with the public. They, of course, lean into the sensational imagery of the masks and the bizarre details of the stories.
Here we have the daily broadsheet, O Globo, conflicting with this glossy weekly magazine. Both are pretty slick, though. Neither one of them are really tabloids. But the details about who the Frenchman was is murky. The entire story is uncorroborated, actually. Now, O Globo was still in print, but Manchetti went under, unfortunately, in 2000. But in the 60s, they were a big deal.
So this is an interesting concept as well. Think about what he's trying to do here. He's trying to receive signals. Now, here's what may or may not have been that known in the 60s, but you actually hear a lot of talk about this. It's all about consciousness and frequency, right? So when I first started hearing about like Brian Greene and string theory and the theoretical physics that go into it and what's the nature of our universe, it's all vibration, right? And you're trying to receive frequencies or vibrations through the air for free. He's trying to turn his body into a satellite dish of sorts.
Can I make our first movie reference of the episode?
Go ahead.
You know what this reminds me of? For people that will have seen it, and I think we used to talk about this movie a long time ago on the show because it was when my son was younger, he loved it. Kelly's Heroes. And Donald Sutherland had a great character in that movie who was very hippy-dippy, and his name was Oddball. They called him Oddball, right? And he drove a tank. And he was talking to his sidekick, Moriarty, played by Gavin MacLeod, who later went on to become Captain Stubing on the Love Boat. And he's just like, always with the negative waves, Moriarty, always with the negative waves. And but that it plays into all of these waves and frequencies and whatever that people were talking about back in that period all around the world.
Yeah, I know. And that's the cliche, but I think nowadays, hopefully we're getting a little more in tune and open to that stuff. It's not just relegated to the woo, but Yeah, vibration, frequency, vibes,
Yeah.
good vibes. That's what people are
Yeah,
talking
good
about. Good
vibes.
vibrations.
Yeah.
Got to get me some of those.
Beach Boys.
And yeah, and the idea though is that, yeah, I get it on that kind of hippy dippy wavelength, if you will. But now we've come to learn that strings of vibrating energy are
That's right.
perhaps how the universe runs at the very base
Yeah.
level.
Resonance.
Yeah, it's all about energy and frequency and this and that.
It reminds me of one of our very early shows that we used to joke about how long it took us to get around to it was the Coral Castle.
Yeah.
And Ed Leeds Skallman, who built the Coral Castle in Florida, looked that up. It's a very old show of ours, but it's still a very fascinating mystery. He supposedly told a bunch of people that the way that he levitated giant blocks of coral had to do with resonance and frequency, and he used a tuning fork to move tons of coral around without any heavy equipment.
No, it's been out there, and I think we're going to be knowing more about it, I think, in the coming year or two, and I think it's been out there for a long time, but people don't really pay attention until it creeps into popular culture, and then into the news where it affects your daily life. Like, oh, I should maybe pay attention to this. But I've been watching Severance, and they actually had a shot in there. They don't explain it, but they're using cymatics, which is sound and vibrations causing patterns, and pretty complex ones, in sand on a plate that's charged. So you run vibrations through that, and they're pretty complex. And it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. It's like, yeah, it seems more than just kind of cool to me. Like, you're looking at some kind of sacred geometry that underpins everything.
I love that stuff.
The point is that people would say, oh, that's some wacky sci-fi stuff that, was popular in the 60s. And of course you had The Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone, and people are getting into some of these concepts here. And okay, that could be an episode where you turn your nervous system into some kind of antenna. But there was actually a pill of some kind, that there's an idea that with the use of metals, perhaps, of course, metals are connected in many ways to vibration and frequency, that there's a way to turn, you have minerals inside yourself. You take vitamins and minerals, right? You do have naturally, you need minerals.
And in the early days of braces, people would pick up radio waves through their braces. They had all the wires in their mouth, and there was a lot more broadcasting going on.
Oh, yeah. And now, of course, you're talking about microwave pulsing, making people sick, and the Havana syndrome, and bone conduction to hearing sounds and this and that. So it's not that woo, it's science, but now we're getting more used to it.
Yeah, it's a little more believable. Well, if all this stuff really happened, and if the other gentleman went up the hill with the lead mask, sounds like a game of Clue, died on the hill with the lead mask a few years earlier, or 4 years earlier, that might establish what looks like a pattern locally. TV technician, weird experiment, ingestible pill, lead mask. And according to Miguelito's blog that we referenced in part one and talked about a few minutes ago, and again, have a link to in our show notes, researchers could not find any police records or newspaper articles from 1962 documenting Hermes or his death. It's basically a third-hand account that came to light in September of 66, right after Miguel and Manuel made national headlines.
Right, so it might be just a local urban legend of sorts that spun out of control after the fact, but even if it's pure folklore, it kind of shows that for whatever reason, in the Brazilian, Scott.
Zeitgeist. In the zeitgeist, yes.
Well, there you go. And again, people are like, oh, what does that have to do with speak of Brazil? But you're talking about a German word connection in Germans and South America and Brazil, and the boys from Brazil and the popular terms. But yeah, the Brazilian zeitgeist at the time, these bizarre ideas about using the human body as a receiver were circulating in this particular subculture, which we're going to talk about more here in a bit. So I finally got around to ordering my 100% leather Harrington jacket from Quince, and it is indeed expertly well crafted, smartly tailored. The leather is high quality, buttery soft and smooth, and you can't beat the price. All as advertised. In fact, I looked so dapper and sophisticated in it that I recently went to a function that called for a sport coat and wore the jacket instead.
Oh, nice. You're a Dapper Dan, man. That's right. That's a bold choice. Yeah. I applaud it.
Oh,
although I can't picture you in a sport coat, and frankly don't picture you, but I am on board with paring down my wardrobe to items that'll work in a variety of situations. Yeah. Kind of a quality over quantity thing, but without breaking the bank.
Right.
I know that jacket could cost upwards of $500 to $600 at a major brand retailer, but Quince has exceptional items at prices that make sense. And spring is a great time to thin out your closet. Rethink about what works for you and be honest about the clothes you haven't worn in a long time. Keep the better pieces that you can wear almost anywhere and donate the one-offs that are just taking up space.
Yeah, and that's why we always keep coming back to Quince, because they make superior everyday essentials that'll make you look well put together and stylish, but without making it look like you're trying too hard.
Yep, the right balance between laid back and refined. And that's because not only is the design and tailoring top-notch, Quince starts with premium materials like their 100% European linen and their insanely soft flow knit activewear fabric, which I love.
Oh, yeah. I never gave it much thought before, but I see why folks that live in hot and humid climates go with linen, because it's perfect for spring into summer since it's a most efficacious layer for being comfortable and breathable, yet still substantial, so you don't look like you're wearing pajamas.
I'm actually wearing pajamas right now. And also, by the way, I love the word efficacious.
Yeah.
And when you use it, that's my favorite deployment.
Well, thank Baron Munchausen for that.
I will. I think that's probably the first time I heard it in my life was that movie. Right. Well, Quince's flow knit activewear fabric is perfect for warmer weather because of its moisture wicking and anti-odor properties. And it's still soft yet classy, so you don't look like you just came back from the gym.
Yeah, and maybe the best part is that their prices are 50 to 60% less than similar brands, so you can actually afford a spring glow up.
So refresh your wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/AL for free shipping and 365-day returns.
Now available in Canada too. Go to quince.com/AL for free shipping and 365-day returns.
Quince.com/AL.
You remember when we went camping with a bunch of the fellas and you invited your old college buddy and we all went mountain biking?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and because we were exploring different trails, I gave one of my walkie-talkies to your pal, and when we got back to camp, apparently he lost it in the woods, and I didn't...
Yeah, I might have forgotten that story, but you always remind me.
I did. I know, it sticks with me a little bit. I didn't want to say anything at the time because he was your good friend, but I was hoping for at least a little offer to replace or pay for it, but not a peep out of him. Not even an offer that I could then graciously decline, saying, oh no, that's okay. Don't worry about it. I still have that walkie, but it turns out having just one of them isn't very effective.
Yeah, I am sorry about that, but
okay.
I guess some folks just like hanging on to their money. Also, by the way, I recommend that every now and then you charge it up and just say, hello, can anyone hear this?
I was hoping it would be
maybe somebody will find it.
Yeah, out in the woods. 15 years later. Well, it sounds a lot also like those traditional big wireless carriers who also like hanging on to your money too. And I also love how they offer what seem like free perks and end up actually costing you more in the long run. And then they might only offer a limited time discount if you call them and then threaten to quit.
Oh, yeah, typical. That's why Forrest and I finally got fed up with our old big wireless plans, with all their crazy high bills, bogus fees, and lackluster customer service, and we switched to Mint Mobile. Folks, if you like hanging on to your money like we do, all you have to do is switch to Mint like we did. And it's not like you'll see savings over the long run. You can instantly see them when you check out mintmobile.com/AL, because their website simply and clearly lays out their plan options so you know exactly how much you'll be spending and saving compared to your old plan. No bait and switch and no fine print funny business. Just try not to kick yourself too hard once you realized how much you could have saved by switching to Mint earlier.
Yeah, and the call quality is super clear and the coverage is excellent. And you don't need to keep overpaying for wireless just because that's how it's always been. Mint exists purely to fix that.
Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network.
Yep, and as we always say, bring your own phone and number, activate with eSIM in minutes, and start saving immediately. No long-term contracts, no hassle.
So ditch overpriced wireless and get 3 months of premium wireless service from Mint Mobile for $15 a month.
If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/AL.
That's mintmobile.com/AL.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month.
New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available.
Taxes and fees extra.
See Mint Mobile for details.
Hi, this is John from St. Augustine, Florida. when I'm not taking care of patients as a non-creepy registered nurse, Scott, I'm listening about my definitely creepy Slovakian and Hungarian ancestors on Astonishing Legends. Now, let's get back to the show.
That brings us to May 12th, 1966, just 3 months before the Vintem Hill incident. Miguel, Manuel, and their close friend Elcio Correa Gomes traveled to Atafona Beach at 9 o'clock at night. That explosion that we alluded to in the cold open produced a huge ball of fire that lit up the sky, and they were there. That blast was heard over 6 miles or 10 kilometers away.
Right. Imagine being in that movie. The shockwave interrupted people in the theater and their movie watching. So the audience pours out of the theater into the streets because, they're scared. They thought they were caught in the middle of some kind of earthquake, which does happen around that ring of fire. And then witnesses said they felt the ground shaking. One resident even reported seeing a stationary illuminated ship about a mile offshore just before the blast, which is interesting.
Yeah.
A fisherman named Alemar Gonçalves Batista gave a formal statement to Detective Wilson Luzada. Batista said he was watching the illuminated ship when it suddenly disappeared, describing it as if it were a vessel that had been completely swallowed by the waters. Sound familiar?
Yeah. I mean, it does. I mean, it could be a lot of things.
Right.
It could have been an actual military vessel or some kind of ship out there. Or lately, we certainly have been talking a lot about unusual craft that are transmedium and able to descend into the water.
Yes.
Could have been something like that. But, the thing I think, though, is when you look at like the Tic Tac and those famous cases, I don't remember those things having lights in most cases. They're just objects.
Well, what we were talking about, Investigation Alien, remember, that was a fascinating bit of footage you and I were highly discussing.
Oh, yes.
Which episode out of that series with George Knapp? And
that's right. I remember
some guys
that
in the
now.
boat were on video watching.
That was
these,
in Catalina, right?
Yeah, off of Catalina, somewhere in that channel there. They have it on video. They're watching these lights kind of submersing under the surface of the water, and also in the water.
Yeah,
and you think like,
that
that's a diver with a light, but it never surfaces. There's no diver's bubbles. It's just kind of there under the water, illuminated, flitting around like a glowing orb of sorts. So it's like, it's still not enough or dramatic enough for people to take that much notice, but like, what is that? Well, we don't know.
Right.
I'm sure Mick West has an explanation, though. But continuing on, though, commercial ships, think about it, rarely travel through those specific waters. So, of course, the authorities, they think maybe a clandestine submarine, which is also not that far-fetched, but was that what it was? And would a clandestine submarine be emitting light? Wouldn't that give you away and remove the clandestine part of that?
That's a super valid point, actually. Why have a light on? So Detective Walter Fernandez went out to the beach to investigate the explosion when it happened, and he documented, as we said earlier, a strong smell of sulfur coming from these deep tracks in the sand and also just in the general area. And that gouge in the sand was 14 inches wide and 10 inches deep. He said resembling the tread marks of large tires. It was almost like something had, I think, come out of the ocean, which again, was this a military landing vessel of some kind? Investigators later discovered that prior to the explosion, Miguel had contacted a ham radio operator named Evaristo Fidelis de Morais, and Morais allegedly had a powerful ham transmitter just 300 meters from that exact beach.
Right. So the Atafona Beach incident drew immediate military attention. And again, because it does sound like something without prosumer aspects to it. You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, who's able to do that if that just happened? Again, you have an explosion. They're going to be interested in that.
Right.
There's a lot going on for them to pay attention to. Inspector Fernandez initially assumed that the 9 o'clock blast was an unexploded German naval mine from the Second World War. Again, talking about Germans and what we discussed here in the cold open. It's like, maybe that's what it was. Okay, that's pretty likely. He theorized it had just washed up and hit the reefs near the lighthouse. But the local fishermen reported something much stranger.
That was the ship that we talked about, like something being out in the water. So the Army, Navy, and Air Force Secret Services all launched investigations into the explosion. And they had intercepted unauthorized radio traffic in the area just 2 days before that. So when you combine the Phantom sub, unauthorized radio, and reminder, we're still living under a military coup here, the involvement of the military in the investigations makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's the height of the Cold War. There's a lot going on here to wonder who's out there doing what. Or
Yeah.
again, is it a threat? That's what you first have to assess. But the actions of it, yeah, they're just very strange. And so didn't seem like possibly a mine. But the Navy recorded operators using the call signs talking about the unauthorized ham, and again, getting the number stations and things like that.
Yeah.
These are the call signs that they picked up. CKJ21, CKJ22, and CKJ23. And none of those prefixes were registered in the area for ham operators.
So building an unauthorized transmitter in 1966 required specialized hardware and serious expertise. Now, we know Miguel and Manuel possessed
Right.
both of those things, I should say. Reminder, they went to a high-end electronics store in Niederoy asking for specific Philips components.
Right.
Police had later found a note in their pockets listing vacuum tube part numbers. They wrote down EY88, ECL82, and 12AU7. We mentioned this in part 1, but for folks out there who know vintage tech, the EY88 is a high voltage rectifier, which rectifiers keep coming up in our episodes for some reason. And the 12AU7 is a dual triode tube. I have no idea what that is, but apparently that's used to amplify radio frequencies.
Right.
So they were assembling the exact components needed to broadcast a clandestine signal.
Yeah, they also associated with Moraes. As we said, he had a powerful unregistered ham radio transmitter that he operated less than 1,000 feet from the Atafona explosion site.
Yeah, so that's a lot of strange stuff going on. And the escalation continued into June of 1966 when some kind of homemade device detonated in the garden of Manuel's own house. Photographs from the police file show Manuel's father standing near the blast crater, surrounded by the remains of shattered metal pipes and wires, which means, in theory, that Manuel and Miguel were apparently actively building and detonating things right in their own backyard.
I do like, I'm glad nobody got hurt. I don't want to see any, because these things are dangerous, but it also reminds me, I think of, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he was experimenting with 0-point energy and gravity, and he devised something in his garage, and that blew up.
He's in our story folder, this guy, yeah.
Yes, okay, just a quick look here, which we have the luxury of doing sometimes. But the book is called The Hunt for 0 Point by Nick Cook.
Yes.
So I've had that for years. I thought it was fascinating. And I guess my point that I was making was I love those kind of books. It's like, look, I just don't know what to believe about them, of course, but just love the concepts. And then I read later, like, oh, that guy's full of crap. It's like, okay, all right, thanks for ruining everything that I'm an idiot apparently for liking this stuff. But no, it was a fascinating book because Nick Cook was a journalist who did investigate black budget projects. He worked for Jane's Weekly, the military armament manual that everybody refers to.
Yes.
The guy I was talking about, I think his name was Alexei Cherkukov. He was a Russian guy, quote unquote, garage inventor. He created what he called the gravity flyer or anti-gravity device. And this thing, it didn't destroy the house, but it did blow up. It caused some major, whatever he was doing, caused some major disruptions, you could say. What's termed, I think in the book, electromagnetic mayhem. It caused his webcam that he was using to cut out the Wi-Fi router went down. It was a massive electromagnetic interference that just kind of just spiked everything, similar to some
like an EMP.
Yeah, similar to that, like an ionic wind. So I love that. But
didn't he die in that?
I don't think he.
Or am I thinking of somebody else? I thought that guy died.
You might be thinking of Jack Parsons, who was also diddling around in his garage, and he nearly died. He did have an explosion.
He's the JP of JPL.
That's right. All kinds of weird occult stuff tied with him, and that's a fascinating story. This a lot of other podcasts have covered, but no, we're talking about just people messing around with stuff, and they might be onto something. It may be exactly what they were going after, but they have tinkered with some kind of power. And again, these aren't guys, this is not the Darwin Awards sort of, but where people don't know what they're doing and they're messing around with stuff. They had a lot of knowledge and they were expert on certain aspects of this, but with unknown forces and properties. So that brings us back to the lead masks. They weren't just doing it. This is not the Reynolds aluminum foil wrap, of hats that people make fun of. These aren't cheap Halloween masks. They thought that these were necessary for their protection. They
That's right.
handcrafted these things out of industrial lead pipes. That's not easy to work with either. The same neighbor, Jose, actually caught them in the act making these things. And he walked into Manuel's home workshop and saw them physically hammering out a heavy lead pipe. Just as a side note, talking about aluminum foil, that was popular for a while. Taking a huge ball of aluminum foil.
Oh, yeah, making a perfect sphere
and
out
you
of
can make a
aluminum foil.
sphere
Yeah.
with a hammer.
YouTube
And my
video.
friend Chris, I just remember seeing a post from that. And he's a carpenter, like a fine finish carpenter, and has a big shop. And he did it. And he said, let me just tell you, you can do it, just don't. It's not fun. It takes a long time.
Yeah,
it's not
right,
fun, but you
right.
can make one. Yeah. And he
Yeah.
did. It's just like, it's not worth it. So anyway, this is something different. They're hammering out these lead masks because they think they need them. Whatever they've tripped onto, some kind of knowledge, this
Yeah.
was integral. And of course, well, what we know about lead, it prevents and blocks magnetic frequencies, radiation, that kind of
Yes,
energy.
because it's so dense.
Right.
Yeah.
Manuel's wife, Anneli, later confessed to the police that the hammering and sawing went on into the early morning hours the day before they left for Niteroi. And that reminds me of Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters, pulling up all the crap from his yard, the neighbor ladies fencing for the ducks, and they all get away,
Yes.
and the geese, and he's shoving that stuff through the kitchen window, the bricks and the dirt. That kind of hell-bent dedication and focus, and just these
Yes.
guys hammering away into the night because it's important. They need these things.
Yeah, and in this case, the police even found the leftover scraps. Detectives located a bucket of metal shavings in Manuel's workshop containing the exact lead cutouts in the shape of glasses with the nose thing and everything. So that's the homemade lead masks are not my bag, baby kind of proof there.
So remember, folks, these eye masks did not have eye holes in them.
That's right. They look like Doc Brown's glasses.
Yeah,
when
right.
He comes back and with the Mr. Fusion, and he's wearing those silver sort of wraparound shades.
Yeah, so what I wonder, though, it's like it's something that you're looking at, and if you're thinking like you're being exposed to that kind of radioactive energy, wouldn't you need a whole body lead suit?
I know. Why is it just your eyes?
That's what I'm saying, is that they're looking at something, or something was directed towards their face and eye areas.
Yeah. What about the family jewels? I feel like I would be wanting something for that too. So, like a little Clockwork Orange situation.
Everybody that went to the dentist, right, when they take your dental x-rays and they put that apron on you, the bib, and it's heavy, they don't need that anymore. In fact, the last few times I went to the dentist, because they have new technology where the x-rays are so low dosage that it doesn't really affect it. You don't really need them. So, but yeah, that was a common thing. And so there's something about them witnessing something that was specifically directed towards the face and eye areas, the orbital sockets and that. And if you've ever messed around with lead, shaping thick lead pipe into contoured opaque blindfolds, that requires heavy shears, a lot of rasping, physical exertion. The only time, and I actually haven't done this, but I've seen a lot of it, is the old-fashioned guys, when they created they modified the old classic cars, they used to call them lead sleds. When you chop like a Mercury to make that cool low-profile thing, and you didn't have Bondo to fill dents, if you're really serious about it, you melted lead and you would use that to fill out dents in your classic car. Then, of course, shape it, sand it, paint over it. But it's
chopped and channeled.
It's a lot of work, right? So that's what we're talking about here. It's a lot of exertion. They were sealing off their vision completely. So there's something important about that, which is also like this Spielberg, don't look at it, Marion. There's something about that. That's a spiritual angle of something you're not supposed to see. So when you combine all the unregistered radio broadcasts, the high voltage vacuum tubes, the explosions in the garden, and all the hand forged radiation shields, you start to get a clear picture of two men possibly preparing for some kind of catastrophic discharge of energy or something. But that's what I'm saying, specifically, not the whole body. It wasn't, a whole suit made out of those lead aprons. Whatever that energy was they were in control of, or what they thought they would be receiving, they had a specific idea about and did their best in the workshop.
We covered their physical moments through Niteroi pretty heavily in part one. You guys already know about the miserable bus ride, the frantic stop for raincoats, and Miguel demanding the 2-cent deposit receipt at the bar. we don't need to retrace those steps. But there was some physical evidence that we didn't discuss, something that they left behind in compost.
Yeah, that's right. The police searched their home repair shop and found a specific book heavily annotated by our guys called Life on Planet Mars, written by Hercilio Maes, Maes. And in the preface, Maes claims that the entire text was dictated to him by a spirit named Ramatis, Ramati with an accent, and then S.
This isn't just a philosophical text, though.
Yeah.
This reads like a technical manual. We have a copy of this PDF. It's in Portuguese or Spanish, I think.
Yeah.
But, it's got a very cool cover. I think we can share it. I think it's available publicly. So we might be able to post a link to that for folks who want to check it out.
You're going to get a C&D from Mars.
Yeah, I know. But I guess it reads like a technical manual for extraterrestrial contact from that time period anyway. There's actually a chapter dedicated entirely to Martian spacecraft.
Yeah, kind of an electronic early form of ECETI, CE5 contact here, using devices, though, and technology. It's all like Richard Shaver stuff, right? And the kind of the things that were popular that now people are like, yeah, that was kind of kooky, as Greg Barker would say, kooky books. But now some people are taking them seriously or wondering, like, is there something in there that's kind of true? So there you go. Everything's being turned upside down, and it will so even more coming very soon. But this book, it gets highly specific. The book describes Martian saucers emitting intense polarized light. But more importantly, it claims that the hulls of these ships are powerfully radioactive. And how many times, have we heard about that?
Yeah.
This book explicitly warns that getting too close to the craft's magnetic field will instantly disintegrate any terrestrial object. And there you go. That tracks. It's like Joe Simonton. He got burned, remember, with the exhaust.
Yep.
People getting sick.
Like grid on his stomach.
Oh, the guy that dug up, and I'm blanking on this too. I think it was in Texas, and there was a reported buried spacecraft.
It's not the one that hit the windmill.
No, it may be that, but the guy who dug close to there, his hands swelled up to freakish size, retaining a lot of fluid. And like
a Mickey Mouse glove?
Yeah, you don't want to get close to it. There's something,
Sorry,
it was something, fun, but I know you say that, but he's had all his fingers.
Oh my God.
But it was something that it doesn't look real. I mean, his hands are so swollen. And so, there's something going on with the propulsion, but that's pretty common knowledge if you believe this kind of stuff these days.
Yeah.
That they're dangerous. Don't get too close. Don't look the UFO.
All this stuff working together kind of makes the crime scene inventory makes it a little more logical. If you think you're about to rendezvous with a radioactive spacecraft that might disintegrate you or your eyes, I guess, you don't just walk up the hill empty-handed. Yeah. Maybe you bring grounding tools like damp towels and aluminum foil cups, and you remove your metallic jewelry, hide it deep inside your clothing, and maybe you take the time to hand hammer solid lead mask to shield your retinas from the blinding light that the Martian ship is going to douse you in when it approaches.
We talk about that again in part one, but a lot too, the welder's conjunctivitis, seeing that your eyes being... it's like looking into an arc welding light.
Mothman witnesses get that, folks. That's how we first learned about that.
Right, and you do wonder, is it all connected? So this could be, though, the context we need to wrap our heads around. What the hell happened here? They weren't suicidal. I don't believe that from all the research. Could they have been following, though, some bizarre safety protocols they got from some unknown source or source unknown to us, but known to them?
Here's another interesting thing, something else that didn't make it up the hill. According to relatives, Manuel purchased 30 kilograms of raw lead before leaving town, but the mass found on Vintem Hill only account for a fraction of that weight, and authorities never located the rest of the material. So where did that go?
That's pretty interesting, and I do wonder about, again, other components or things that they were going to make. But you would think that would be still left behind in the workshop. Like I said, it takes a long time to work with those materials. It's not like making yourself an aluminum foil hat. But it's pretty interesting. So we also have plenty of the mystery of the AMS monogram, handkerchief. That we touched on in part one. But the 1969 police files reveal a prime suspect. Yeah. A fugitive pops up known as Professor Ramayana or Count Ramayana. No shortage of interesting characters here. The Count, Saint Germain is back. But his real name Well, Alejandra Monteiro Silva Neto. So the letters AMS, these initials perfectly match that embroidery on the handkerchief.
Yeah, so Ramayana also used to live right near Vintem Hill. And get this, he hosted parapsychology experiments and even lectured at local universities while also on the run from the law. The police eventually tracked him down in Recife, but he supposedly escaped the siege by hiding inside a refrigerator.
Oh, dangerous, yeah.
It is dangerous. And also, I mean, I don't know. I guess I can't fault these guys, but like, I feel like if I was trying to find somebody who disappeared and there was a refrigerator there, I would probably peek in the door. But who knows? Who knows?
Who would suspect that, right?
Later. Yeah, anyway. But when they finally caught him many years later, he bragged that he would just use his magical powers to hypnotize the guards and walk out. Just simply walk out. He's saying, I'm not the Count Ramayana you're looking for.
Right, but how many times have we talked about that, the guy at the Tesco or whatever in the UK seemingly hypnotizing the cashier while he's talking with her to reach into the till and just take out a bunch of cash and walk out.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I know that sounds crazy and it's the stuff of Star Wars, but I do think something like that is possible. All these things we're talking about, it sounds pretty out there. But we've been hearing forms of that for as long as we've been doing the show.
Yeah.
But this, I mean, yes, it's a character, a lot of charlatanism going on with all the isms here and the crazy, the lectures and the being on the run, though, is a different angle. So what was he on the run for in the first place?
Well, the police records don't list out the specific charges, but they state he was wanted for, quote, many other crimes, end quote. He'd already been arrested and escaped from prison at least twice. And when investigators finally tracked him down, he was actively pretending to be a university parapsychology professor.
Well, there you go. It's a good cover. And I'm sure I would have loved to have audited a class just to see what he's up to. So, yeah, they were getting desperate. The authorities, by 1967, they were chasing down leads at, again, it just sounded like cheap pulp detective novels, being one step ahead of them. At one point, the police theory shifted to a straight-up crime of passion, perhaps. They started investigating a local man known in the underworld as Wilson the German. Again, more Germans popping up, who probably arrived by submarine.
Right.
The theory was that Miguel had been involved with Wilson's wife, Wilson the German, and the whole Vintem Hill expedition was a trap set by a jealous husband.
And to me, that just shows you how much they wanted this to be a, quote, normal crime.
Well, then you can kind of wrap your head around, even if the German was an escaped Nazi. Okay, yeah, it's out there, but okay.
They want to close the case and move on with their lives. They can't figure it out. But, because the evidence is so weird, the Niterói police chief, Ido van Ferreira, actually did something unprecedented. He officially requested the help of an actual parapsychologist and medical doctor named Silvio Lago.
Well, Lago, he wasn't just some fringe psychic. I know people are rolling their eyes, but he was a respected figure in the spiritists community, which we're going to be talking about more here in a bit. But he spent weeks reviewing the files and eventually submitted a 10-page report to the police. He concluded that the masks, the wet towels, and the capsules weren't for a murder. They were for a psychophysical experiment. He argued that Miguel and Manuel weren't victims of a person, per se, but victims of their own inclination towards the marvelous, in quotes.
Yeah.
Yeah, their own curiosity and the spirit of adventure got the best of them and ended in a death by misadventure, sometimes the police call that.
Well, yeah, and that plays back to some of the things you were talking about earlier with the 0 Point Energy guy and that explosion, and then Jack Parsons, and people that are really pushing the edges of what you can safely experiment with and maybe stumbling too far into a realm where force equals mass times acceleration gets the better of you.
Yeah, well, you don't fully have all the science, but you have enough of it.
Yeah.
But as far as the investigation goes, it's a lot to investigate. So Miguel and Manuel, they weren't just testing things in Niterói and Campos. Police discovered that they were conducting field tests across multiple cities in the neighboring state of Espírito Santo. They traveled to Mimoso do Sul, Alegre, Colantina, and I mashed all of those together. I can't look up every name. There's just too many. Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
But their activities were so frequent and widespread that the military started investigating whether these guys had posed a legitimate threat to national security. Like, who were you working for? Like, what are you trying to do? Who are you working for?
Yeah. We have ways of making you talk.
Yeah.
You got two guys running a regional network of high voltage radio tests.
Yeah.
The military gets involved. It makes perfect sense. They were drawing a lot of attention to the skies, really.
Yeah, speaking of the skies, over a year after the bodies were found, the Vintem Hill airspace was still highly active. Again, remember, this is 1968 in September, and a photographer named Ari Pereira managed to capture an image of an unidentified flying object hovering directly over the exact same spot where the men died. Now, this thing apparently emitted a silver light so intense, he had to use a yellow filter on his camera lens just to shoot it. He watched it stay perfectly still for a few minutes before it shot off at an incredible speed.
Multiple residents across Niterói reported seeing that exact same object, which keeps reinforcing the idea that whatever happened up there on the hill wasn't necessarily a one-off event, and also may have been external to our two guys.
Exactly. And by 1969, the authorities were desperate for a mundane explanation, as you've been saying. Convicted criminal João Paulo named Hamilton Dazani even confessed to a local judge that he knew exactly what happened. He claimed he was recruited by a gang of car thieves to act as a getaway driver.
Yeah, this dude was pretty clever. He named 3 specific accomplices, guys with underworld nicknames like Acacio, Spaniard, and he even reused the name of the earlier suspect, Wilson the German. He's back in there.
I watched this movie, it makes me think of Lewis Hamilton, the F1 driver. I think the highest paid athlete in the world still.
There you go.
But it's like Baby Driver or something. Just like, what do you, huh? All these, it's just crazy. But that's what happens in these wacky stories. It draws wacky people out of the woodwork. Right. And so it doesn't help the authorities. Now they got to chase down all these weird leads. So Dazani, Hamilton, told the authorities this crew met Miguel and Manuel at a local Niterói spiritist center run by a woman named Helena. The gang then lured the technicians out to Vintem Hill, forced them out of the car, and made them swallow poison at gunpoint. And they stole the millions of cruzeros and split up. Now that's the least likely thing that out of this whole crazy setup that I believe in.
Well, that's the thing. So it ties up the missing money, though, that we
Right.
talked about in part 1, and the capsules in one neat package. But the police quickly figured out that Dazani was lying through his teeth.
So his entire confession apparently was an elaborate fabrication designed to orchestrate a prison break. So here's the next act in the movie, the twist. And apparently he told the Niterói detectives he could lead them to one of the killers, a guy he claimed lived on Catacumba Hill. And he specifically asked the police to remove his handcuffs and give him a 100-meter head start so the suspect wouldn't get spooked. Okay,
That's where his cleverness ran out.
Well, it depends on the level of the cops you're dealing with, because things like that
true.
actually do happen too.
Yeah. Well, in this case, the police didn't fall for it, and Dazani caught another charge for false testimony.
Oh.
So that leaves us with the physical bodies themselves. The initial autopsy was a logistical nightmare. You might remember how we pointed out that the Niterói coroner's office was overwhelmed dealing with a murdered detective that same morning that the bodies were finally discovered. So Manuel and Miguel's internal organs sat decomposing in jars on a shelf for a long time.
Yeah, so it's all ruined. By August of 1967, authorities ordered a full exhumation of the bodies at the Caju Cemetery in Campos. They wanted to run advanced toxicological screens.
Yeah, so they even sent tissue, hair, and bone samples to the Institute of Atomic Energy in Sao Paulo for neutron activation analysis. The technicians tested the samples for heavy metals like arsenic, mercury, barium, thallium, and everything. Every single one of those came back negative.
That's kind of interesting, too, if we're talking about swallowing pills with possible exotic metals in them, or just dealing with metals in general. But medical examiners, they had hit kind of like a chemical wall here. The local morticians who handled the bodies back in 1966 had saturated the tissues with formaldehyde, if you remember, during the embalming process.
Right, and that binds to the tissues. It masks the presence of pretty much any other toxin or poison, and it destroyed whatever chemical evidence was left in their bodies.
Right, so now you're at a forensic dead end.
And this is something that we alluded to earlier. This means we're probably never going to know scientifically what was inside those capsules. Now, the official cause of death was permanently listed as undetermined, which closes the door on the physical investigation. We're going to have to look somewhere else for answers and try to come up with theories.
Okay, well, if the physical evidence is gone and we can't trace that back, we then have to dig into the psychological and what we'll call, I guess, esoteric concepts that seem to be surrounding this legend.
Yeah, so after this next break, we're opening up the files on Carticist Spiritism, LCO's channeled entities, which we haven't gotten a chance to talk about yet.
Yeah.
And then we're going to dive straight into the theory block to figure out what may have actually killed Miguel and Manuel, what they were up to. So stick around. So we've had some pretty intense experiences out in the field over the years, as longtime listeners no doubt have heard. But this September, we're packing up those memories and taking them straight into the woods.
And not just any woods, the Pennsylvania woods. You know, there's a wet, hot, bad, magic, palpable energy out there and a history of high strangeness that just kind of hangs in the air. It's the perfect setting for what we're about to do.
Our Patreon supporters have heard this already, but we've got some exciting news. We're officially on the lineup for the 2026 Wet Hot Bad Magic Summer Camp, happening September 10th through the 13th at the Acres in Equinunk, Pennsylvania.
Yes, we were graciously invited by the powerhouse duo of Dan and Lindsay Cummins and their incredible crew from Time Suck and Scared to Death to their third year of this awesome summer camp. It'll be a gathering of space lizards, Roberts, Annabelles, and now you, our listeners.
A totally judgment-free zone to just let your freak flag fly. But we aren't just going to hang out, do archery, and watch the Ninja Warrior course. I wonder if you can combine the archery with the Ninja Warrior course.
What do you mean, like that event where you shoot arrows while attempting to conquer obstacles? I'm not sure that exists.
Well, if it did, I feel like I'd be good at it.
Yeah, didn't you tweak your knee going up the stairs to your studio the other day?
Not everything I tell you before we press record is for the world. But yes, I did.
Okay, that's what I thought. Well, I'm sure you'll be better by then. You know, they're going to have a ton of great stuff going on at Wet Hot Bad Magic Summer Camp 2026. In addition to that stuff, there's also going to be speed friending.
Ooh, nice. That's what I used to call riding the subway in New York. But the main thing we will be there to do is a live show.
Right.
We're going deep into the dusty boxes of evidence in the basement of Blanket Fortiana for this one, digging down on our own past field work.
Yep, and we're going to be talking about some of our most chilling personal experiences. The visceral off-mic moments from our time at the Sally House, take a shot, or the various lockdowns I've attended, like those long, dark hours inside Waverly Hills Auditorium. The evidence we gathered and the feelings that stuck with us. Telling those stories out there in the dark, surrounded by that camp atmosphere, it's going to be unsettling in the best possible way.
And it's an all-inclusive weekend. Dorm-style cabins, meals, drinks, live bands, comedy. It's a 4-day, 3-night escape. Tickets go incredibly fast for this, folks, and we want to see you there.
So come find us by the campfire.
Head over to badmagicproductions.com or just click the link in our show notes to grab your tickets for the 2026 Wet Hot Bad Magic Summer Camp. We'll see you in the woods.
I'm Soph, and this is Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
We've talked about Spiritism a ton over the years and how it's different from spiritualism. Scott, you want to kick off a quick refresher on that?
You are always putting me on the spot.
That's my job.
I'll do my best here.
Okay.
Feel free to jump in if I get this screwed up, because it still confuses me sometimes.
I know.
Spiritualism with a U, spiritualism,
right,
is what most Americans think of when they hear the word. It kicked off in the 1840s in New York with like the Fox sisters.
The Fox Mulder sisters.
Seances. Yes, Fox Mulder. It's the seances, it's the table tipping, it's the Ouija boards, trying to get a message from your dead great aunt, most of which we've covered on the show before. But spiritualism, spiritual, not spiritism, but spiritualism, was very focused on the physical phenomenon of talking to ghosts.
Yeah, and to your point here, we've talked about both and explained them in past episodes, but I think of the two, Spiritism is the lesser talked about one.
Yeah, it really is. I agree.
And you're right. It's easy to confuse the two, but Spiritism, without the U, was formalized in France. Honestly, kind of concurrently in the 1850s by Allan Kardec.
Yes.
And it's a whole different ballgame, okay, which we've talked about, but it's important to know the difference and not lump them in. And also you'll be well liked at cocktail parties when you can differentiate here. So Kardec wasn't interested in spooky parlor tricks. He approached the spirit world like a scientist trying to map a new continent. And then the biggest dividing line between the two was reincarnation. And another one I guess is Mesmer, another French guy. Yeah,
that's right.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Kardec wasn't just some like mystical guru living in a cave burning incense, you know.
Well, no, not at all. His real name. Wait a minute here. Why am I getting all the foreign language stuff tonight? Why are you doing that again to me?
No, when I saw this guy's real name, when I saw Kardec's real name, which I don't think I knew before now, I was afraid to try and say it.
I see.
I'll do it. I did take 4 years of French, so getting ready. Here comes my 4 years of French 1,000 years ago. Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail.
Ooh.
No, I would try again. Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail. Pretty good, right?
Very nice.
I can see why he went with Allan Kardec. Just, not for nothing. When you walk into a party, just like, you know what, just call me Alan.
Quick side note. I was at a party and there was a really nice, super nice French guy who was somebody's friend. But his name was, I like to think I can do a few accents here and there. Not well, but I can work my way around it. And he was trying to graciously tell me his name was Yves, Yves.
Oh, sure.
And he's like, no, my name is Yves. And I go, Yves. He goes, no. Yves. I go, Yves. I thought I was nailing it. He's like, no. It's like you're close, but it's like, it sounds exactly the same to me. I'm sorry, but anyway.
Yeah, it was only a few years ago that I figured out that RHYS was Reese and not Rice. And the only reason I learned it was because of the Americans. And then we even have a friend named Reese Waters, who is does the podcast Canadian Politics is Boring. He lives up there in Nova Scotia along with another friend podcaster, Jordan Bonaparte, who has a show called the Canadian Gothic. But anyway, they're not too far apart, and they're both very close to Oak Island.
Yeah.
But anyway, Reese, Rice, I don't know, Allan Kardec, Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail.
Yeah, you can't even tell that you even studied French. It just seems natural, like you were.
I feel like that's an insult.
No. I know, I see what you mean here, though. Like, not that you had to study for it. You like I said, it comes naturally, like you were born in Quebec, Quebecois. Yes. But I just recently, speaking of which, I just got my head wrapped around this awesome band, Angine des Poitrines. But it translates as angina pectoris, the heart disease. They're cool math rock, microtonal. Anyway, I get distracted here. But yes, you're right. There's a ton of great Reeses. We of course has the fantastic, fabulous Reese Witherspoon. But
that's not how that's spelled, though. That's not even close. That's how you say it. But yeah, there you go. But yeah, it was Jonathan Rhys Davies in The Americans, right? Who shocked me further, not past the pronunciation of his name, but with the fact that he was British after I watched years and years and years of the show and his perfect American accent.
There's so many great Reeses, Rhys Ifans, John Rhys Davies, Griff Rhys Jones. That's who I was just talking about. So, but getting back to our point here is that that's interesting, and I think nowadays people are a little bit suspicious. When somebody has a nom de plume, it's just, why did you go with that anyway? But for what it's worth, your French accent is much better than mine. Anyway,
thank you.
Who was this guy? What was he up to? Well, he was a French educator, a translator, a mathematician born in 1804. And he had a respected academic background and actually wrote standard educational textbooks for French schools. So he was a man of strict logic, grammar, and arithmetic. This is a true scholar.
Yeah, like Spock.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. Okay. But so when the whole turning tables and seance craze hit Europe in the 1850s, He was initially highly skeptical.
Yeah.
He only started investigating it because he thought it might be some kind of undocumented physical phenomenon like magnetism.
Right.
But once he decided that there was maybe an actual intelligent force communicating, he decided to try and logically deduce what was going on with table tipping and the seances that they couldn't explain through simple, mundane reasons. And to be clear, there's no shortage of charlatans involved in spiritualism.
Well, sure.
Because it was such a strange mix of parlor trick entertainment and the paranormal.
Right.
No harm was seen in manipulating theatrics at that time, as long as the people in your parlor were entertained.
Yes, were you not entertained? Well, in fact, the phrase parlor tricks originated during this time specifically because of all the stuff that people decry it for, right? It's just, and it happens in a parlor, and back when people had parlors.
Yes, we don't have parlors anymore. We're lucky if we have a dining room, so.
The places that you had to, and I never got this as a kid, like, why another room? And it's like, well.
My great-grandparents' house had a parlor.
Yeah, well, think about this.
Yeah, they had a big house in downtown Raleigh. It's been torn down now, but in Boylan Heights of the Connells album fame, which you're not going to know, but anyway.
Yeah.
But the house was a 28-room house with a wraparound porch. And this is the house that I think I mentioned in a Dead Letter or a previous episode.
Where we did.
The roof of the porch was that special color of that was supposed to ward off evil spirits.
That's right.
Yeah, the blue-green color and I had never knew that until like 2 weeks ago. So
that's right. And here's what I remember is that we didn't actually end up talking about it.
Oh, okay.
Because
Maybe
it was one of our notes, and then we were running long, so we decided to cut it. But that was a fascinating. That was a fascinating aspect. And like I said, it's not really that much of a tangent because these ideas and feelings that are of this era were pervasive in popular and cultural history.
So I should just say, since it didn't come up in another show, just quickly, that was called Haint Blue, Haint blue. It's a pale shade of blue-green that's meant to ward off ghosts. And my great-grandparents' house was built, I think, in the 20s in downtown Raleigh. And it had that on the porch. And I never even thought about that or knew what it might have meant until a few weeks ago when we were doing research for another episode. So there you go.
Right. And the 20s, as you may remember from past discussions, a lot of that kicked up in popularity after World War I because so many people had died. Same thing after the Civil War. And so when there's a lot of death, people want to communicate. But talking about Kardec and parlors, and I understand what I was saying is that, as a kid, I'd never understood that. We were never that fancy to have a house with a parlor. But if you invite people over, well, you don't want them in your dining room unless you're having dinner, and you don't want them in the family room, which is reserved for family. So you have a place to entertain and do these things, which is the parlor. Yeah, parlor tricks, the term originated because people were doing these things in a parlor and because of all the chicanery. But Kardec essentially crowdsourced the afterlife. And what he would do is that he would prepare a list of complex philosophical and scientific questions, and then he'd give them to completely separate mediums across different cities. Again, it's a little bit of the scientific method here. And he would then cross-reference their channeled answers to see if there's any patterns here. And he only published the information in his book called The Spirits Book, and that's spirits, plural, with an apostrophe, if the independent answers corroborated each other. Because he treated the spirit realm like a peer-reviewed journal, and based on what we've been learning about those lately, he may have even been better at vetting the messages than they are.
There's American spiritualism usually dictates that you die and you go to some version of the Summerland or heaven. Kardecist, that's named for him. It's so cool to have a movement. Kardecist spiritism argues that your soul reincarnates over and over to morally and intellectually evolve. And the way you learn how to evolve is by empirically interviewing highly advanced incorporeal spirits.
Makes sense. I'm down with that. Anyway, it's basically treating the afterlife as an extension of physics and higher education. A novel approach, I think, which is exactly why it appealed to our tech-minded guys down in Brazil. They weren't ghost hunters. They thought they were tapping into cosmic data streams, which is a pretty advanced theory, in my opinion, anyway. So that brings us back to Miguel and Manuel. They were treating these channeled messages not as spooky campfire tales, but as vetted technical data.
Right. So in Brazil in the 60s, Kardechism wasn't viewed as a fringe parlor trick. It was a massive, highly structured, and culturally respected belief system. So to restate the idea here, the core tenet of Kardechism is that spirits are just human beings who have shed their physical bodies. They're still learning, evolving, and reincarnating.
Yeah, and because it was framed as a science, Cartercism essentially argued that you didn't need blind faith. You just needed empirical evidence. You could literally sit down with a medium and interview spirits to learn about the nature of the universe, which is a lot like the shows we were just talking about. Not only,
That's right.
well, maybe the Philip experiment, but also the Skoll experiments, where they're talking to passed on scientists, engineers, to
Yeah.
ask how things work. So there you go. That's how you get the information from people who have passed on. And so it's a bit of animism too, I think, in just that there's ancestors or people that have passed on before us relaying and being helpful, relaying information to us.
Sure.
It's like that blend of Christian morality with rational scientific inquiry. And this is some of the perspective we dove into in our two-part series on the siren call of hungry ghosts and the vertical plane. I was just about to say,
Yeah.
it's a little bit, and I'm going to touch on this in my short theories section here. It sounds a little like 2109, the entity that you're dealing with, who is kind of a jerk. Anyway, more on that later.
Absolutely. That's the thing. A lot of them appear to be kind of a jerk. That's the scary part. Well, you don't hear much about Spiritism these days, at least not compared to spiritualism.
Right.
Because it eventually faded out in France.
Yeah.
But it absolutely exploded in Brazil in the 60s. By the mid-20th century, Brazil was the global capital of Spiritism.
Wow.
Millions of people were practicing it. They had Spiritist hospitals, Spiritist psychiatric centers, massive community hubs, all of it.
That's a fascinating sociological aspect of just how also their attitudes are different than us boneheads here in the States.
Right.
They're a lot more open to stuff, as they are with UFO and UAP activity. It's not such a stigma with it.
Well known.
But yeah, so in this case, it wasn't just a grassroots folk movement. We're talking about congregations filled with educated middle-class folks. And we're talking doctors, lawyers, and engineers.
Right. So remember how we mentioned Niterói's police chief brought in Dr. Silvio Lago to review the case files?
Yeah.
And then Lago wrote the 10-page report claiming the guys were doing a psychophysical experiment?
Yeah, exactly. Wow. You know, from an American perspective, a police chief hiring a parapsychologist to solve a double homicide sounds a bit off the wall. I can understand that. But in 1960s Brazil, consulting a spiritist doctor like Lago meant you were bringing in a highly educated medical professional from a mainstream, culturally established philosophy. And just something, you know, we always talk about with law enforcement and solving crimes. If you talk to spiritual mediums who have worked with the police, what they always tell you is that, they actually consult with us a lot. They just don't advertise it because of that stigma we have here in the States.
Yeah, and we allow them to take our secrets and not tell people they got them from us. That's probably the other part of it.
Right.
Well, Spiritism was firmly in the Brazilian zeitgeist.
Nice.
And Lago was an expert acting as a bridge between the physical evidence and the Spiritist subculture that Miguel and Manuel were operating in. And that cultural blend of science and spirit also explains why Miguel and Manuel, two highly analytical electronics technicians, were drawn to it. Spiritism historically loved technology.
Yeah.
They saw the invention of the telegraph, the radio, and the television as proof that invisible waves could carry complex information across vast distances. So think about that, because to me, that's a super fascinating concept.
Yeah.
Today, we take invisible communication for granted. Now, we all have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and understand that we're constantly bathed in GPS and communications data just raining down from the sky like a, hurricane from these invisible satellites that, they tell us are up there, but we can't see them. Well, at night you can, if that is what they are. But you know what I mean? So but you just we're all taking that for granted. Information is swirling around us 24/7 on these invisible waves.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the great character actor for one of my favorite films, Heat, with Robert De Niro and Val Kilmer, and of course Al Pacino. But it's the guy who does all the, the wiring plans, and he sells them to crews that rip off,
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so De Niro's asking, where'd you get this, all this data, all these plans for alarm systems? And the great character actor Tom Noonan, who also played the serial killer Francis Dollarhide in Manhunter, he says, it's just flying through the air. He says, I just pull it out of the air. He's like, what? He's like, well, you just got to know how to grab it. So that's kind of the concept, is that this information is just kind of flying around. And we don't think much or think twice about all the data, just the Bluetooth data that's swirling around your head right this minute, or how you're listening to this podcast. It's solid information, but it's invisible.
If you're wearing AirPods, Yeah, it's an invisible signal coming into your ears. So.
Right. And so for these guys, if a vacuum tube can capture invisible radio frequencies bouncing off the ionosphere, well, why could the human brain, properly tuned, also capture frequencies from the spirit realm or even extraterrestrials? Because to them, there was no dividing line between physics and parapsychology. It was all just frequency and vibration. You just got to tune in, man.
Yeah, dude, you got to tune in. But and speaking of tuning in, it's time we finally talk about the third man at the Atafona Beach explosion, a real third man, not an imaginary one.
Right.
Their close friend, Elcio Correa Gomez.
Elcio wasn't just another TV repairman tinkering with high-voltage tubes. He was essentially the primary contact for the highly technical extraterrestrial beings they believed that they were communicating with.
Right. So we've established that these guys are steeped in Cartesian spiritism.
Right.
But I think the massive question hanging over all of this is, how do we get from a French teacher interviewing ghosts in the 1850s to two TV repairmen possibly trying to contact highly radioactive Martian spacecraft, which we alluded to earlier, in 1966? Where does the alien jump happen?
Well, it actually isn't a jump at all. It's baked right into the original 1850s Kardec doctrine. Because one of the core chapters in his book called The Spirits Book, which we just mentioned, is entirely dedicated to the, quote, plurality of inhabited worlds, end quote.
Ooh, yes. And you know what the Spirits Book reminds me of? Of course, I bring this up all the time. It's the Tobin Spirit Guide.
Yes,
maybe this was the inspiration.
Exactly. Well, someone's going to make a compendium of that kind of knowledge because there's a lot of interest in it, and not just by quacks.
Yeah.
But Kardec literally asked the spirits if other planets in the universe were inhabited. And they basically said, well, of course they are. You think Earth is the center of everything? I know it's so simple. It's like I would feel foolish. It's like, yeah, of course. Yeah. What do you think? You're that special. And actually, I have the exact quote right here from the 1857 text. Kardec laid the book out like an interview transcript, like a series of questions and answers. So for question number 55, Kardec asked the spirits, are all the globes that revolve in space inhabited? And the spirit's channeled response was, quote, yes, and contrary to what earthlings believe, they themselves are far from being first in intelligence, goodness, and perfection. Nevertheless, there are individuals who think that they know the whole truth of the matter and imagine that this little planet is the only one privileged enough to be inhabited by reasoning beings. Pride and vanity. They fancy that God has created the universe only for earthlings, end quote.
Wait, so we're not at the top of the spiritual food chain?
Yeah, why would we be? Listen, this is also striking. It's striking at the very heart of what's currently being hotly talked about and debated is that existential shock, right? With disclosure. Yeah. It's like, what do you mean we're not the only ones in the entire universe?
Not only not the only ones, but not at the top.
Well, exactly. Look, it's just like, then we're a fluke. And that's just the way it is, just pure chance. And it doesn't make sense because we haven't seen any. Or the other argument I love is that I've not seen any proof. Well, it's like for the rest of this stuff, okay? It's like the skull experiments. It's like you have to be sitting there and it's a personal thing to experience. Right. And then what do you consider as proof? So again, people are just saying like, well, there's been, the government's not shown us any proof. No one has, they talk about these anecdotal experiences. Show us the spacecraft, show us the alien bodies.
Right.
And that's the ghost in a jar, the Bigfoot in a cage. But that's what people are talking about here is that, not being at the top of the food chain, even the spiritual food chain, because even if you say like, okay, well, obviously, makes sense. I'll go with that. We're not the only ones in the universe, but I refuse to believe it's possible that they are here. Okay, well, then there's the physical aspect of it. And then there's the spiritual aspect of it is that do they have to be separate? And so the thought exercise goes on. And in question number 57, Kardec asks if the beings on those other planets have different physical bodies than us. The spirits answer, quote, undoubtedly it does, just as, in your world, fishes are organized for living in the water and birds for living in the air, end quote.
I love that. So if the whole point of the universe is for souls to reincarnate and evolve, then different planets serve as different grade levels for the soul, maybe? Earth apparently was viewed as kind of a cosmic middle school, a place of suffering and heavy physical trials. But planets like Mars or Jupiter were viewed as universities for highly advanced, morally pure beings.
Yeah, I'd say the way that we've been behaving since our beginning, we're kind of like a cosmic pre-K.
We've been held back.
Well, look, we're working out a few things, but that's kind of my point too, that's the purpose. Like, what's the purpose of all this? Well, they have their own things going on and their own advancements and own enlightenments. So to a Kardecist, an extraterrestrial wasn't some little green man flying, in a flying saucer coming to probe you, okay? Which we like to think in very concrete, dramatic ways. An alien to them was just a highly evolved spirit who had mastered both morality and physics, which is also fascinating. To combine the two, we tend to separate them. And this is where it gets super interesting. By the time the 1960s rolled around with the space race and the atomic bomb and UFO sightings exploding across the globe, a subsect of this religion was born in Brazil called UFO Spiritism.
Ooh. Yeah. So these guys believe that because humanity was messing around with nuclear weapons, these highly evolved extraterrestrial spirits are finally trying to intervene and share advanced technology to save us from ourselves.
Yeah, common theme.
Okay. So we know that's a lot of background, but we sort of need that context to frame who Elcio Correa Gomez was, not only to himself, but to Manuel and Miguel.
Yeah, Miguel, Manuel, and Elcio formed a very small, highly undercover scientific spiritist group. They were conducting their own off-the-books research, and Elcio supposedly served as their primary medium.
Yeah, according to our cursory research, when they held their sessions, Elcio wasn't channeling a deceased uncle giving them life advice. He would go into a deep trance, and the entities that spoke through him claimed to be highly advanced scientific beings.
Yeah, so the 1960s Brazilian version of what everyone in ufology is now referring to as NHI, or non-human intelligence. And like we've seen before, when contact is made, not only with what are thought to be aliens, but even dead guides, I guess, these entities were allegedly feeding them technical homework. Elcio would channel complex instructions, and then Miguel and Manuel would write down the blueprints. They were being told to buy specific vacuum tubes, build unregistered ham radio frequency modulators, and conduct high voltage tests out in the field. Again, right out of our series on the vertical plane.
Yeah, in shades of John Teeter's grocery list as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I need this weird stuff to do this thing that you don't understand.
The 5100.
By the way, I can't get it in the future. I've come back to get it now, or you have to build it. So yeah, this is something we've seen before. And that's one of the great things about doing our shows, like these patterns that come up again and again and again in these stories that aren't ostensibly in any other way connected. But there's these themes that play through them. But to be incredibly clear here, we don't know for a fact that communicating with a Martian spacecraft is exactly what Manuel and Miguel were trying to do on Vintem Hill that day. But it is one theory that is held by many for sure.
But when you look at the physical breadcrumbs they left behind, which would be the explosive field tests, the vacuum tubes, the lead masks, the heavily annotated book about radioactive UFOs, the idea that they were attempting to initiate contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence is high on a lot of lists about this case. But the real question is, did Elcio or the people who led them to this experiment believe it themselves? Or was it some kind of con?
Hi, I'm Allison Green, and you're listening to Astonishing Legends with Scott Philbrook and Forrest Burgess. Now back to the show.
This is a light crossover into theories here, but if we pull back from the extraterrestrial theories for a second and just look at this like a standard homicide detective, Law and Order, Brazilian aliens, Elcio is the most logical suspect for a very earthly crime known as robbery.
Well, yeah, we can't forget that Miguel and Manuel walked out of their homes with millions of cruzeiros in their pockets, enough to buy a car. it's not a huge amount of money, but it's not nothing
Yeah.
either.
Yeah.
And when their bodies were found, the money was gone.
And LCO knew they had that money. If he was faking his trance channeling sessions, he was in the ultimate position of power. He could have easily delivered a channeled message from the extraterrestrial saying, "You must go to Vintem Hill on this specific date. Bring the money to purchase the cosmic materials. Take these capsules to prepare your physical bodies for the radioactive frequency and put on your lead masks." By the way, I just want to apologize to people who are trying to go to sleep and listening to our show, because there's nothing I hate worse than when a host does some silly voice and it wakes me up right as I'm about to nod off. So if that happened to you, I'm so sorry.
So you're one of the folks who does the podcast thing, trying to.
It's not me. I don't have a choice. It's my wife on the other side of the bed. I can't reach the iPad, but yeah, she's playing stuff all night long. Podcasts are playing. Yes, but sometimes something will take me out of it, and then it's either that or a horrendous sound effect in a commercial. Sometimes that kind of thing wakes you up.
Yes. Now. Well, folks, listen, we don't mind if, we don't mind if you're using this as a sleep aid. More power to you. Just please use one of our sponsor codes. But the idea is that psychologically, I guess, or subconsciously, or in that twilight area of sleep, that anything kind of changes different.
What we should really do, though, is as we get later into the show, we should talk quieter and slow down.
No, I think just by me explaining concepts, people are falling asleep. But
yeah, that's true. That's
again,
true.
That's fine.
You do you. That's true. There's nothing can beat you on that thing.
That's fine. We're perfectly okay with that. But we would hope that you're, at least paying a little attention to engaging these fascinating concepts. Because here's the other thing. It's like, as we start to near you're getting to our final conclusions, you have to look at it in these different categories. Like you said, true crime, paranormal, what's going on here? This is really the perfect crime? Yeah, you don't need a weapon, really. You do need some poison, apparently. You get your victims to voluntarily hike up a hill, swallow the poison, and then they blindfold themselves, and all you have to do is hike up later, grab the cash, and bolt. But why have them hike up a hard-to-get-to hill?
Well, maybe because you need time to do the recovery from the bodies to get the cash or whatever.
I suppose, things could be explained, although this is one of the cases that baffles me more so about what's considered rational or explainable.
Yeah.
But anyway, please talk about what what the police did check into.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with LCO.
Yeah.
They did look into LCO. He's an obvious suspect. They brought him in for questioning multiple times. However, they couldn't definitively link him to the hill that day, and without the toxicology report to prove the capsules were lethal, they didn't even have enough physical evidence to charge him or anyone else, frankly, with murder, because the forensics weren't there.
Well, that could be a knock against the LCO theory, is that if they hadn't bungled it, they would have a lot of proof and traceable.
Right.
So, that's just fortunate for him, I guess, if that was the case. But there's a second earthly theory here, one where LCO, or whoever gave them those capsules, wasn't a malicious murderer, but just a true believer who made an unfortunate but catastrophic mistake.
Here's the thing, though. The police did heavily investigate LCO. They brought him in for questioning multiple times. However, they couldn't definitively link him to the hill that day, and without the toxicology report to prove the capsules were lethal, they didn't have enough physical evidence to charge him or anyone else, frankly, with murder, because there was a forensic dead end on all that stuff.
Yeah, right. Well, here's where there's a wrinkle in the theory, or a wrench in the works.
Yes.
When you start diving deeper into this LCO as murderer theory, because for all intents and purposes, it seems like he had an ironclad alibi. Because he produced a physical receipt proving he was buying Volkswagen parts at a store in Campos, which is over 400 kilometers away, on the afternoon of August 17th. Lucky for him. That's why I like hanging on to receipts, just in case I'm ever charged in a interstellar, interspiritual, multidimensional crime.
Yeah, but when you bring the cops back to all your files and papers, they're going to be like, you know what? Forget it. We'll
I don't.
Whatever you say, we believe you.
But that is again fortunate, and it also it does poke a hole perhaps in that theory.
Yeah,
and even neighbors were corroborating seeing him working on his car around the estimated time of death. So he's got eyewitnesses. Yeah,
LCO is physically cleared of being on the hill, like he's proven it. And the standard robbery theory takes an even bigger hit when you look at some other physical evidence that got buried in the initial reports, the hidden jewelry that the guys had on them.
Right. Well, Miguel had even taken off his plated Montagne wristwatch and his wedding ring, if you remember.
Yeah, that's right.
But they weren't stolen.
Right.
He hid the ring inside his jacket and the watch deep inside his pants pocket, which you would assume somebody would also riffle through.
Yeah. I mean, that's the first place you look when you're a thief, right?
Yeah.
And that also goes back to that instruction that they had that said protect metals. I mean, maybe that's what
right.
people are speculating. But this contradicts like just them being mugged or something, alive or dead, you know?
Right, because remember they thought somebody was a bad guy was already hiking up there, saw the perfect, mark, and no one's around. So, why not just mug and kill them and then take off with their stuff?
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Why would they leave behind like a fancy watch and all that? And then it also kills the theory of them taking their own lives. It doesn't seem like you would carefully stash your watch in your pants pocket to protect you if you didn't have a plan on surviving, to put it back on later, right? Which brings us to the second earthly theory here that, one where whoever gave them those capsules wasn't a malicious murderer, but imagine this, a true believer who just made a unfortunate yet catastrophic mistake.
Well, like you said earlier, Forrest, this is the death by misadventure theory, which honestly, when I look back at my 20s and 30s, kind of a miracle. I didn't die by misadventure.
Well, that's a different kind of misadventure, right? Yeah, we've all been in cars with friends or ourselves driving too fast, that kind of thing.
Right.
This is a little more complicated and not something I frankly would have thought of, but okay, let's look at the angle though. What if there was no con? What if they genuinely believed that they were going to make contact and the capsules were just supposed to be some kind of a hallucinogen or a psychic buffer to help their consciousness separate from their bodies? Or I would say some kind of, like I said, if it's all frequency rooted in physics and material earth science, is that maybe it's a compound or material that facilitates. It is kind of like you talked earlier about radioactive materials. Just quickly, like if you've ever had, let's say, an X-ray machine, like you swallow barium, right? The milkshake, the really heavy milkshake, because it's got a lot of metals in it. And like I take a fluoroscope, so
you don't always
doctor
swallow it.
No, I didn't.
Sometimes they put it in somewhere else.
That's so talk about capsules.
Depending on what needs to be X-rayed.
No, I had an ulcer in college, and that's what they did is that they have you drink the shake, and then the doctor can see it go down live rather as opposed to an X-ray still, so he can see what's going on. And then afterwards, they give you a capsule to get rid of it from out the other end because it is heavy metals and would be hard to pass. So it's like drinking concrete with a raspberry flavor. That's also part of this theory here is that, the capsules weren't just some junk somebody made up or that they had some kind of poison in them, but it would facilitate the communication.
Yeah. And I mean, so this would be a little bit like taking ayahuasca before like a shamanic ritual or something. But here's the thing. Whoever mixed the chemicals maybe inside those capsules got the dosage wrong. The guys hike up the hill. They lay down. They put the wet towels. They put the mask on or whatever. Wait for the Martian ship to arrive. But instead of transcending, their hearts just stop. An accidental overdose.
Okay. Yeah, that's possible too. But in line with not the crime, but actually, trying to follow the directions. The recipe got a little off kilter here. But then you ask, what happened to the millions of cruceros?
Well, maybe it was just a crime of opportunity.
Perhaps.
Vintem Hill is not, I mean, it's a tough hike. We talked about that, how hard it is. The weather wasn't great. However, the guys were up there for 3 or 4 days, I think, 3 or 4 nights. So it's not completely out in the middle of nowhere. It's a known spot for hunting birds. It's plausible to me that somebody else stumbled across the bodies before those 2 young men found them. Like the first kid and then the second kid. Maybe somebody realized they were dead, dug through their pockets, took the cash and ran. However, those people, if they did, left the jewelry behind. The money was more hidden in the jewelry, if I recall correctly. So, or maybe some other person came across the bodies and never reported it and just rifled through and took what they could get and panicked and left. But I don't know. It's a little bit of a stretch, I think, to suggest that when you look at all the details, like
Right.
it being a robbery, feels pretty complicated and grandiose from a plan standpoint
That's
to
what I'm
rob
s-
somebody when you could just like hit them over the head with a stick and take their crap,
That's
in
what
the
I'm
alley.
saying. Yeah,
Like,
you already covered a
yeah.
couple of my bullet points in that. You don't have to go that far, as I was saying
Yeah.
earlier, is that if you wanted them out of the way or they're doing this and that, it's a lot of trouble and
Right.
a lot of theater to make it look like something else. Maybe look, people do all kinds of weird stuff on both ends, whether they're
Right.
committing the crime or the victim of the crime, or they're going to harm themselves. People do odd things that don't make a lot of sense. Look at
Yeah.
the news
Yeah,
currently.
that's true.
Okay, it
Yeah.
still can't things can't be figured out. But this is also as another one of my go-to theory angles is that it's a confluence or different layers of stuff going on at the same
Right.
time, which complicates the logic of this case
Yeah.
here. So you have a tragic accident that's also compounded by just a random robbery. It's plausible, I guess, but
Yeah, yeah.
also, like I said, I like to say both things can be true. Who's to say they weren't really on to something? And maybe this all might have worked if you believe any of this at all. And the only reason it didn't was because they actually died. And then you remind me later, Scott, because that ties into what I want to talk about later is like what possibly could be going on here.
Well, it's not too much later. We're about
Yeah,
to
yeah.
start our theory, so everybody get ready.
Ooh, okay.
I guess I feel like logic, it doesn't always explain
No,
human
no, no.
behavior, especially when you factor in what do we got here? Glowing UFOs, secret
Yeah.
ham radios, clandestine submarines,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
the fact that whatever happened on Vintem Hill might have successfully happened to our Frenchman 4
Yeah.
years prior on a nearby hill.
Mm,
That detail for
mm.
me, Forrest, and the possibility of that story also being
Yeah.
apocryphal sticks in my craw a little
I
bit.
agree.
I'd really like to know if that other thing happened.
Right.
It would truly change everything to me, because I'm not saying that it would make the case for NHI communication facilitated by drugs and 60s analog tech, but it would at least make the case for a pattern,
Yeah.
regardless of what the pattern's underlying reason for existing was. It puts more weight on the case if this same bizarre thing happened to people that were unknown to each other, geographically nearby, but separated by several years. That, to me, that's like, okay, now we have a pattern. Now we can
Yeah.
say, because on its own, either one of those stories, the first one that they had a hard time finding
Right.
proof of, or the second one that we know the bodies were found,
Yeah.
either one of them on their own, just you question everything when you think of it as a standalone event. But if you were like, oh, wait, no, this is the second time this happened. It's like cattle mutilations. One mutilated cow, okay, that's super weird.
Right.
Maybe it was some crazy guy with a scalpel.
Yeah.
But like when it's, hundreds of times, that's
Yeah.
when you're like, okay, what's going on here?
So that's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be, it just has to be once. It's like, I think it was
Right.
Greg Valdez, he wrote a great book on cattle mutilations. I think his father was the one who starting to research it, in the Colorado area. And then I think he was a police officer. I think Greg was too, retired. And then,
Oh, yeah, it might be down in Trinidad.
yeah, so he was taking
Yeah.
it from a standard investigational approach with law enforcement. And I remember, he was interviewed by Jim Harold years ago.
Yeah, sure.
A great interview, and
Oh,
I
of
liked it.
course.
He was very, I want him to get to have more weird facts, but he was very objective about it. And,
Right.
it's like everything else. It's like, look, 95, maybe even higher, 97% of the cases he thought could be explained by something more mundane.
Yeah.
But there's always
Yeah,
that 3 or 4%. He said, like, that had absolutely no plausible mundane explanation. And those are the ones you're always wondering about. Or as Michael Shermer said, like that, also with Jim Harold, I've talked about this for years. It's like, okay, there's 10% that absolutely blows our minds. We have no explanation. Let's just put that on the shelf. And let's look
Right,
at the other
right.
80%. It's like, you should be looking at the 10%.
Right.
But here,
right.
you don't have the tools for that, right? So
Right.
that's why people of concrete materialism thinking, well, it's like, let's just look at the stuff we can get our heads around. But anyway, you get a very valid point, my man. And, I think it's time now to start to wrap this up. So where's your mind at when what you think really happened here?
Well, I haven't seen my mind since I got up this morning.
I see.
I'm still looking for it around the house. I think Biscuit the cat took it.
Where is my mind? The pieces.
Where's
Which
my
you're hearing
mind? What'd you
everything
do with it?
now. Just everybody's just
yeah.
ripping off that riff. Yeah.
I don't know, man. This is a complicated case.
Yeah.
It's, it's the same thing that's been happening to us now for, 12 plus years. It's like you think you're going to get into something and get some kind of answers or
Yeah.
come up with a theory. And that's happened to me on our show
Right,
a few times, but more often than not, It's just more questions. It's just more questions.
Yeah.
And this one's particularly hard. Of course, there's the language barrier for us and, not being down there and able to find real world sources, outside of what we can find online.
Quick question.
Which is tricky, but
because this was so weird and, not an easy hike and ultimately lethal, would you go right now to that spot to investigate?
Yeah, I would. I'd be curious to know if this spot even still exists. But, that was the 60s. And when you look up Vintem Hill in Brazil in this area, it's still there, but it's really just a little strip of trees. It's maybe 25 feet wide.
Right.
Like, I don't know if that's actually where they were, because now there's a ton of houses and apartment buildings all around there. So
I'm just curious.
I bet if you went there locally, the locals, especially the older folks, might be like, oh, yeah, that happened over here. And now it's so-and-so's house or whatever, or a parking lot. But
Right, because you think about, does the location itself that they were told to go to a potential portal area, or just like why that specific spot, or it's just like, that's just a handy hill to go where there's not a ton of people. But it's like a little different than going inside that. Remember the M-shaped cave or where the guy disappeared. We might cover that story one day. He went in armed. He'd been exploring those caves.
Yeah, it's on the list.
Okay.
I don't know, I'm a little worried that there's about 2 sentences worth of information about it, and like a mysterious YouTube video. But
it's thin. Or the miner's cave where the guy goes in and there's no wind.
Oh, and the chains are swinging.
Only a couple
That's on the
of chains.
list too.
Only a couple of chains are swinging. And you think, it's just wind coming out. It's like, no.
Like, why is that one way in the back swinging and the 5 around it aren't moving at all?
Those places I might hesitate to go in by myself.
I'm not going in a cave. I'm sorry. You can do that.
Right. I've gone into a
nursery at the Sally house, I think.
Yeah. But no, that's what I'm saying about the feeling on these places. Like, okay, is that a place where just something like this could happen, or just bad people? Like I said, if this is a place of a crime, like, well, it doesn't make sense to go there anyway.
Yeah.
It's just out of the way. And I don't know the criminal history. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of crime committed in that spot, but is that a place? It's like I said, in the Middle Ages, or it was at Sherwood Forest. There's places where, it's you don't want to go in there. You're going to get mugged or worse. But there's that wondering about the place itself as having energy or power, or was that random? And like I said, there's places you wonder where you get a feeling of like, it's time to turn around, because I wonder, apparently they went through with it. So that's what I'm also saying, is that they didn't get a weird vibe. They were knowledgeable and welcoming of this kind of spiritual angle on this, and they'd already prepared. They were nervous though. And I wonder if it's being nervous about either taking the substance, or are they nervous about, is this going to work? Are they nervous about meeting some strange weirdo? So the nervousness was observed.
Yeah.
But they're also excited enough to go through with it.
Right.
So remember the guy who faked the confession, Hamilton Dazani?
Yeah.
And then he names a local Nitoroi center run by somebody named Helena, like a Madame Blavatsky type.
Right.
I don't know. In the investigation, they cover these local centers, investigated them, but underground religious groups, they're pretty highly secretive, especially during the time of the heavy authoritarian military rule.
Right.
But then to this local group, for whatever reason, they're poking their noses too far into something. Did they give them these orders, marching up the hill? They poisoned them? I don't think so. Doesn't seem like the MO of these woo-woo groups. But it just doesn't fit with other stuff we know. And again, we'd spoken earlier about something like, the Marshall Applewhite cult. I'm saying, where the only way you can get to the mothership, you have to drink the Kool-Aid and then
Heaven's
pass
Gate,
on.
right?
Heaven's Gate.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that earlier. Is that what this is, where maybe they thought that they could die taking the substance? But like, that's the only way to get there. Well, no, because again, there's physical things. The tickets back to home, their families, they have businesses. Just everything seemed like they were going to fully expect to return physically home, not make the final journey to the cosmos. So that's the suicide / cosmic success, going up against the hidden jewelry. It doesn't make sense to me that they intentionally took their own lives to pass on.
Yeah, I mean,
Here's the list. Return bus tickets.
Yep.
They had a receipt for the bottle, remember, the
Yes.
glass, to get the few cents back.
Yeah, the hidden watch, the ring.
Yeah. They took them off, and like, why would you care? Like, what is it? You're not going through a metal detector under the spaceship.
Yeah.
None of that lines up for me.
Hi, I'm Brandon Winters, and you're listening to Astonishing Legends with Scott Philbrook and Forrest Burgess. Now, back to the show.
Here's the other thing that's interesting, Forrest, and I think we talked about, I can't remember if it's earlier in this part or in part one, but there were spiritist centers and places where people were meeting very close to Vintem Hill, but they were everywhere.
Right.
That's when they went around and they found people, as we talked about, like Helena or whatever, who was part of that, but they couldn't connect any of that to these guys. And the other thing is, like, I know we talked about Spiritism kind of dying out, and it is way less of a thing than it used to be, but it turns out in 2010, according to a national census in Brazil, there were still 3.8 million Brazilians who are spiritists still today. And they also mix it with Catholicism, which I think is fascinating. That's a theology thing that I was like, I would actually like to learn a lot more about that. How are they connecting those two things?
Yeah, it's fascinating, but that's human nature, right? It's the same thing with pagan and Christian beliefs early on. You blend the two because there's things you like about both of them that you want to keep.
Go out a Christmas tree. It's pagan.
That's right. Yes, that darned Oliver Cromwell. How dare he take that away from us? You know what I'm saying? Like, these things endure no matter what the prevailing stuff is. You can't squash that down. It's going to squeeze out some other way because it just appeals to people. So
yeah. Well, so what about poison? What do you like? What about curare? Because I know that was a theory that people had talked about. Why that particular poison?
Well, it comes from there, doesn't it? Sort of poison dart frog, all that kind of good.
That's right.
Stuff from the rainforest. It's just around a lot. But why does that matter? That angle? Well, curare causes muscle paralysis and asphyxiation, which I guess could perfectly explain the poses, the peaceful poses. The lack of struggle, they just laid down and fell asleep wherever they were without, like I said, clutching and foaming and all the other horrible things that can come with other types of poison. Did that, the detective there, Saulo Soares de Souza, he was working on that theory that the capsules contain curare. Again, but he's grounded, like I said, like he can't return in a report that's woo-woo. He's got to say, this is what happened, this is what they took, whether they purposely did it or not, or somebody gave it to them, this is what killed them.
Yeah, but here's the catch with that. If you take it orally, it doesn't do anything. It has to go directly into your bloodstream, apparently. So,
yeah, again, that's a good point, right? So then how would that have killed them?
Here's another theory. It's one of my favorites, just on general principle. It's called the death by inhibition theory. We'll call it that. It's mechanical asphyxiation, which is more than just strangulation. Rio Forensics and Chief João Antonio looked into this, and this is basically... This is a sudden massive shock to your nervous system, like a hyper-precise strike to the back of the neck that causes instant cardiac arrest without leaving any external or internal physical traces. Yeah. But that's like a kind of like Hitman the game sort of way to kill somebody. It reminds me of in The Matrix, of course, this was the front of the neck, when Neo, jabs Agent Smith right under the neck there when they're fighting on the subway platform.
Oh,
but,
yes.
It's a great scene. But anyway, but also death point striking, DIMMAC, D-I-M-M-A-K. If you just like do that one thing and the person's done.
Well, that is a theory
I think that's getting,
that takes a lot of like esoteric knowledge and mastery, but that's one theory that I think still is tied to the Bruce Lee mysterious death, that he pissed off a martial arts grandmaster and the guy just did the 5 fingers of death on him.
Yeah, right. It's exactly the exploding palm technique. Or the heart just stops, victim
Kill
drops
Bill
peacefully.
Part 2. Yeah,
exactly. Coroner can't find anything.
Again,
so it's like, he just had a heart attack.
Even though I believe that's possible, I think it's very unlikely. Because look, if you're just a hitman, like you're waiting for them, it's like, oh, I'm glad you arrived. Bang, bang, you're dead.
Yeah.
And you just hike down the hill by yourself. It's like,
also,
why go to all this?
Effort. It's a lot of effort to kill these two guys. Like, it's just a lot going into it, which makes you think the ritual around it was more part of the point of what they were doing rather than
Right.
just a cover for something.
Okay, so then that's one of my theories, like the gaslighting, self-annihilation angle is that you wanted them out of the way, you wanted them out of the town.
Right.
You listen, it's not so remote because the more perfect way to do that is they never find the bodies, right?
Right.
Which I
right.
don't know if that's going on now, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where like it's just more of a mystery because then you don't know if it's a murder. They're just gone. And you have no answers and you have no questions because you have a lot of questions, but none that can be answered by your usual investigative techniques. And so that's the perfect thing, right? No criminal, like the most perfect thing is that, or like in Looper, it's a time machine. You just send the dead bodies back somewhere else. There's nothing to investigate, nothing to tie you back to.
Right.
So, but it's easy. I would admit it's like, okay, you gaslight these two guys, but for whatever means, either it's again, part of the government, the authoritative military branch. These guys are, they're part of some rebellion that they want to quash or send as a signal to others like, hey, all you folks that are interested in this wacky, weird stuff, don't go digging too deep because you'll end up like these folks. It's like it was a message. That's why you leave the bodies and that weird thing. But like, I don't know. It's a pretty weak message because, like I said, there's no answers. It's just weird. You know what I'm saying? It's not like if you want to send a message, you do it in a brutal way.
Right.
You hang, what does a cartel do? They hang you from a bridge. It's very obvious, it's on the nose because they don't want you to mistake that. So is that what's happened? Like I said, it's a way to get them out of town on their own voluntarily. And that the bodies are going to be eventually discovered. It's not real strong. It's not a strong possibility for me. But talk about, because this is right up your angle here, with the
right up
Neo
my
agent
angle.
stuff.
Well, how dare you?
Right. For the submarine. Sir, we'll talk about all the spy stuff. Again, this is like rich Cold War South American style.
Yeah, I mean, this is like a Tom Clancy novel.
It is a little bit,
the
sure.
The question is, I mean, because when you think about it, and I do love all that stuff, at least reading about it in fictional places. And, I've watched Slow Horses, so I know a little bit. And the Americans. No, but there is a lot about this that does feel like it could be like a disinfo, misinfo cover for something real happening, something militaristically real. When you think about what happened with the military coup, which I believe was 2 or 4 years earlier, I can't remember now. And I did look at the history of Brazil's government, and it went a long time with a lot of issues before it got sorted out. So a lot of folks were probably rebelling against the and it was dangerous to do that. So maybe you need a cover. I always talk about the guys who came back, they were late and they brought in the train locomotive and it had a big dent in the thing. And they're like, a UFO hit it. And it's like, did it really? Or did you drive off from the water thing with the spout down or something?
Yeah, but then going, okay, you want to razor this Occam style? Do you go that? People love that. They still do. But all right, it's valid, fair point. Do you want to go that like it's some elaborate ruse to again quash this? But as I was saying, remember the Jack Lemmon movie from 1982, Missing?
Oh no, I've never seen that or heard of it.
Oh, it's pretty good. Directed by Costa Gavras. The premise is that Jack Lemmon is he's an American guy. As a father of a young guy that goes missing. He was disappeared. Sissy Spacek is the daughter-in-law.
Yes, now I remember.
Okay,
this
and they discovered that there's some
I've
U.S.
never
involvement. It's pretty right.
Yeah.
So just the boil down here is like I'll just read it. The plot. It's based on the true story of the disappearance of Charles Horman during the 1973 Chilean coup. Okay, so we're in the ballpark here, dealing with the political oppression, cover-ups. All this stuff. He goes down to search for his son. The film ends up winning the Palme d'Or at the 1982 Cannes Film Festival. So Jack Lemmon also won Best Actor.
He won an Oscar for that movie? All right, so I got to put it on the list.
Yeah, we love him. And Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. So the point is that it's not that uncommon and a lot more functional and efficient for the guys that are doing it. You know what I'm saying? It's like, there's a little bit much for that kind of MO. If they want to do that, they just do it. Okay. They're running around unfettered. So it doesn't really hold a lot of water for me. Although, yeah, I do like the Cold War angle. And if you want another weird body being mysteriously discovered, back to one of our old chestnuts and one of my favorites, and I don't know, maybe a soon-to-be appearing episode, the Isdal woman.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Bullets are found. That's people see her talking to strange, mysterious people, scraps of paper. There's like a lot of juicy clues, but like that to me is much more Cold War spycraft going on.
Sure.
No lead mask that I know of. No spiritual angles.
No.
Just a very mysterious thing where people did see them. Yeah.
Here's the thing about the lead mask too, and going back to what I said a minute ago about like really wanting to know whether or not the Frenchman also, was found dead on the other hill with the lead mask, is like, even if the Frenchman story is totally apocryphal and reminding folks that it didn't come out till after the story about these Manuel and Miguel came out, that's when that story came out or got connected. But when they went to research it, they couldn't find any proof that the first one had happened.
Right.
Even without that, these two guys with lead masks, that's weird. It's weird enough by itself. Two dudes with it's weird.
Yes, I agree.
On its own, it's standalone, and we have pictures of those masks and pictures of what they looked like and all the proof about how they made them and everything. Yeah. Those are not an urban legend apocryphal thing. Those are something that were found at the scene.
Yeah, facts, documented,
facts. Exactly.
evidence submitted. So, like I said, that you're right. I agree totally with that. That alone shows me that they were on board and fully believing in what they were doing, and not guys. Look, anybody can be gaslighted. Okay, people. There was a surgeon that fell for the Nigerian prince scam twice. Okay, now there's psychological things going on. After the first time, I was like, okay, you learned a lesson. You do it again because you want to prove everyone else you were right. Like, this wasn't a scam. I did it again. This time it worked. I got my money back. Okay, so there's a lot going on there, but like these guys seem just fairly normal. Yeah, they had some beliefs, but talk about this. I want to know more about the explosion from your notes here.
Here's the thing about the explosion on the beach. It's the thing we have to remember is that LCO said that they went there, all three of them, to witness a light phenomenon or spiritual forces and this flash. And this is an explosion that has ostensibly, I don't know the numbers exactly, but it seems like at least dozens, if not maybe 100 witnesses or more, with the people running out of the theater and everything. And so that's something that also definitely happened. And also they were there. What was that? And again, all right, so is this experimental ordnance for some kind of rebellious anti-military coup activity? Or is some other spiritist type of thing going on there? And they believe that some part of the process that allows them to communicate with the ship from Mars or whatever involves the use of explosives. I don't know, but it's interesting that earlier on May 12th, they had been there. They had been at that explosion. They were at the heart of this weird event that people couldn't really figure out. And I feel like, too, there was so much going on with the government and everything else that to a certain extent, it feels a little bit when you're researching this, like the investigators, whatever branch of the government they're from, are like, we got our hands full. If this is too complicated to figure out, we'll come back to this later, like when we're not dealing with, trying to change the entire government.
Well, it reminds me of, I know a lot of movie references, folks, but this is like a movie. It's like a weird indie. Yeah. It's more like a weird indie film. But one of our favorites, we both love the Coen brothers, of course, but Burn After Reading. And there's a line he's one of the CIA chiefs here. J.K. Simmons plays the CIA superior here. And he's talking about this weird case of all the things that are happening to the officer, David Rasche, also a great comic actor. And he goes, just come back when it makes more sense.
Right.
He's like, okay. And it's like, it never becomes more sensible. It only gets more way out. Okay, because I think as we've lined out our bullet points here, we've gone from mundane and it's starting to go even weirder. And I would like you then to touch on the way out stuff. Now we're talking about, let's fully get into demonic UFOs. Why not?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the hot topic right now. And I would like to say, all these people are like, oh, wow, they're talking about demons with the disclosure and UAP, and people are having an information overload. People are fatigued. If you follow UFOB, the letter B on the subreddit, you can really see the state of things. And there's a lot of interesting stuff, but now, of course, AI footage is making it impossible to tell
Right.
what's going on. But there's a lot of folks who you'll see these sound bites in these news clips where folks are like, well, there's people within the government that think that UFOs and aliens, yeah, it's real, but it's demons.
Yeah.
And I would like to go ahead and say that for a lot of people, we broke that here on our show in January of, I think, 2024 or maybe 23. I can't remember. Whatever year it was January, when George Knapp and Colin Kelleher came on to talk about their book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, which is an amazing book. And they came on to talk about that stuff. And of course, other folks were covering that before us. I'm not saying we broke it worldwide or anything. That's, it's kind of stuff that Jeremy Corbell was probably talking about, and Jim Harold and all of our friends that we respect. But when they came on and they said that, and having read their book, because we had to interview them about it, and I got to that chapter where we were talking about all these folks at the Pentagon who are convinced that all of this stuff is demonic. And as a result, that's part of the reason they're tamping it down so hard. So that's been in the news a lot.
Yep.
And so we think about, what if whatever Manuel and Miguel crossed paths with here was something evil, and you and I have talked about, Siren Call and Vertical Plane and these other stories where people seem to be, you're interacting with something that at first seems nice, but then turns out it's not Mr. Nice. It's Mr. Bad.
Right.
And it doesn't really care what happens to you. And then also if you intertwine that with the whole trickster component and just this idea of something pretending to be a loving human or a loving alien that was like, hey, come up here. We're going to hook you up. You're going to get on our ship and we're going to teach you how to cure cancer. All you got to do is climb up this hill and do X, Y, and Z. You die. Just kind of.
Yeah, maybe that's the lab. I don't know if that, but yeah, it's a fatal trick. I don't doubt that. I think, if you were willing to entertain the idea of malevolent spirits and just look, there's people who would do that. You know what I'm saying? There's people who have murder on the mind, and they would, if they could get that arranged, like, hey, isn't that funny? I mean, just a psychopath, sociopath kind of thing, personality disorder, where it's like, that was funny. That sadly is not out of the realm of possibility for me. That somebody could do that. It's just like, that's they got him to do that. But like, that's a long walk for a joke. Trickster or just a sick joke anyway, or a killing joke. It doesn't kind of line up. That's more the other area. But on that line, and this is where again, I did not know what to make of all this. It's just one of the more baffling cases to me, which is why it's fun talking about it. And I'm glad we covered it finally. But it's like, okay, you've got the mundane gaslighting, you're quashing and sending a message about don't rebel, whatever your rebellion thing is all about, don't do that.
Right.
And then you start leading into, okay, now you're talking about disembodied intelligences, non-human, non-corporeal, all these kind of things that are influencing them. And then you start to, you're looking at, for me, it made me think of two things we've covered, aside from 2109 and Q from Star Trek, just being jerks and like, hey, try this out. It didn't work, did it? What do you do? Just a capricious, mean-spirited kind of higher intelligence, or just bickering amongst themselves because if you start to look at the vertical plane and this entity or group of entities named 2109 or from the year 2109, whatever it is, the entity turned out, if you want to entertain that this being is bickering, petulant, evasive, a jerk, doesn't answer simple questions, but leads you on, and also has a mind to give you lectures about stuff. And so it's like, it's just weird.
The Bill Witch.
Yeah, it's like, really, are you that enlightened, higher vibration and all that? It's like, is that what you want to spend your time on? Messing around with us humans? Maybe. I don't know what passes for entertainment in the other realms, but here I started to think about the vertical plane, but also this angle about what you're just talking about here, the Mothman prophecies, which shout out to our beloved friend, Rich Haddam. And by the way, this is the thing I hate about I love the old Netflix. I love the old Netflix. And that any movie you could think of, possibly, you rented the DVD and it took a day or two to show up in the mail, but it was pretty much any movie you could possibly think of seeing. The problem now is that you go to see something like the Mothman, like, oh yeah, they lost the license for that for this 6 months or this year and a half. Now it's on this other
Right.
platform. Oh, but you can sign
Yeah,
up for
now
that.
you need to go get another streaming service
I'm
to watch the movie that you could have watched on this one you're already
Yeah.
paying for if you'd have just done it a few
Yeah,
weeks
I'm
ago.
right. It's going away. Like, okay, I know you have these deals, but the point being is that the Mothman Prophecies is currently available for streaming if you have Amazon Prime for no
Oh,
additional
nice.
rental fee. It's just on there for free.
Okay.
And a great movie late at night to watch. So,
Yes,
okay,
indeed.
now we talk about, and this is, of course, Rich Haddam's angle on this because his character of Gordon Smallwood, played by the terrific
Yeah.
Will Patton, love that guy.
Yes.
You know,
I love
he's
that.
manipulated by Indrid Cold, some higher intelligence. And again, this is slightly
Right.
different from the reported other things about, Woodrow Derenberger and other folks. We know
Yeah,
that
yeah,
story
right.
well by now. But if you look at that movie and that character, this is what's fascinating in the way that Rich approached this, because it ties in with us a little bit. He's getting messages, Gordon Smallwood, that is, from this higher
Yeah.
intelligence that obviously has some kind of power and is giving information.
Omniscience.
It's starting to drive
Yeah.
him a little nuts. And also, again, I guess the third angle is that it's like Siren Call, the Hungry Ghosts. Also, Rich's involvement here. His interaction, Joe Fisher from the Siren Call, starts interacting with this, maybe not even a higher intelligence, but a spirit that's passed on, right, from another realm, and telling him things. And eventually it was detrimental, fatally, for Joe, in that
Right.
there you go. He sadly took his own life. It was just too much for him, not right. Even I guess the will or the intentions, however good, of this other entity, it wasn't good for Joe. It was
Right.
not what he needed to hear, and it led him down that dark path to his final
Yeah.
earthly end. Could it have been
Yeah.
something like that? And just like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, but I wasn't, what do you, I love the fact that, like, hey, the information you're giving me here is not entirely accurate. None of this existed. Some of
Right.
this is wrong. Maybe like Philip, the Philip experiments. It's like, hey, what are you blaming me for? Look, I'm just a spirit on the other side here. You got to figure that out. I'm just trying to help you along here.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
so it's that weird motivational angle of, like, you're interacting with somebody, you get some jolly, that's the hunger part. You're hungry for this interaction. You get something from it, and
It's
it's
another scary movie. By the
yeah,
way.
but very stylish, yeah. But it's like
Yes, it is.
you're wanting this interaction. It's not entirely healthy for the human that you're dealing with, but like you have your own motivations. And maybe
Yeah.
you figure, like, it's another angle of like, the person died, but you know what? There's really no death. You're just now in the spirit world like I am. And I'm
Right.
sorry I took away your earthly pleasures, but now you're here with us, right? It's great. And so I don't feel that bad about doing what I did, intentionally or unintentionally. And so following along that train of thought, now you have getting back to Gordon Smallwood, getting some information and wanting to know more answers, and it's driving him nuts. He thinks he's going crazy.
Or like when they tell John Klein, just like you're going to take and that's the character that John Keel based character from Mothman, for folks that don't know, but it's like, if you just stay home, if you answer the phone and do what I say, well, you get to talk to your deceased wife one more time.
Right. Just
stay here.
It's a bit of a cruel,
just wait for the phone to ring.
That's right. It's a bit of a cruel carrot and stick. You may never get that answer. Maybe, and who knows, maybe he was one or two more interactions away from finding out or interacting with his wife. But that was, and here's also, I've talked about this a lot with the NHI and UAP experience and phenomenon, is that, and also I guess, mentioned in, I've talked about this so many times and I apologize, but like also a great line by Rich in the film, The Mothman Prophecies, is their motivations or intentions are their own, in that you're not going to understand really why they're doing this.
And if we ever get disclosure, remember that, folks. Remember that line. We're not going to understand why they're
And people, again, and it's human nature, I don't fault anybody for this, but they try to apply basic human knowledge and logic to actions of supposedly beings that are way above us and way more advanced. And then again, it's like, hey, does your child know why you do everything you do? That's the line you get when your kid was young. That's not fair.
Yeah.
So you understand the basic
Yeah.
concept of fair, but like, yeah, I know that what we're having you do is not fair, but you have to do it because there's a greater good. We're not trying to do you harm. You have to understand that as your parent. I don't want the worst
Yeah.
for you, but you right now cannot get the candy, the treat, the toy, whatever you want. Stay up and watch
Right.
Frozen for the 15th million time. You can't do that right
Yeah.
now because you have to go to bed. It's like, well, that's not fair.
Right.
I understand that, but you're not understanding an adult's logic here.
Yeah.
And why we have
Also,
to do this.
you don't live in a democracy.
Yeah, that's right. This is not a yeah. It's the most. It's it's like a kibbutz, right? I pay into this, you get stuff for free. In exchange for that, you
benevolent dictator.
Yeah, you have to do what I
think
say
is, you know.
because ultimately that's for the best. But you don't get it right now, and someday you will. Probably not till you're maybe even past 18, and it's still you're being unfair, and I hate you. So that's the idea here: is that you have some other motivation or intelligence that's having you do this interaction if you want to commune with us, because we get something out of it, but you may not understand, or that will never be revealed. But just do these actions, and then we can communicate more effectively in this location. And that's the setup. But spoiler alert, and I thought about this, but I'll give, if you haven't seen the Mothman prophecies, I'll give you 5 seconds here to skip ahead. 5 seconds. That just hit the advance button
to avoid no spoilers.
The circle, the clockwise running arrow here with the 10 in it. Hit that, and I'm going to come back because guess what? Gordon Smallwood dies because he was told by Indrid Cold or whatever this thing is, this phenomenon is calling itself, that's interacting with people and knows that you and Rich Haddam and Richard Gere both love chapstick. I want to interact with you, so just wait outside. I'm going to come show up, and then we can have this exchange of ideas because I want to help you.
Right.
But then what happens is Will Patton sits outside in the freezing cold all night, and he dies of hypothermia. And they're like, oops, sorry about that. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, you're subject to cold and hot and all that. I'm not, but I'm sorry to hear that you are, and you passed. And it was kind of unintentional. It was like I said, or just like not understood, or is miscommunicated, or in some other plane of being that he didn't die. You know, in our limitless amount of timelines, and some other timeline, like, no, that was great. He went up and he got a lot of knowledge and he came back.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book, as people would claim, and made millions. So the idea is that it was like an accidental thing or just a misinterpretation, which again goes back to the siren call of like, well, you're not getting what I'm doing here. Look, this is pretty hard for me too, Joe or whoever, or Gordon. I want this. You want the information. We both benefit from the interaction, but I don't quite get what your physicality needs are. And by accident, like you said earlier, Scott, it's like you take the pills, but like, ooh, it's too much. Sorry. And so there's that. And they just happen to die. And Miguel and Manuel, unfortunately, we're told by whatever entity this is, take the capsule, you tune in, drop out. Dr. Leary reference here. You put on the masks and you wait on the hill. And it's like, because it wasn't physical, it didn't realize like, oh yeah, it was a little chilly out last night. Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Right.
You having to freeze to death. And the guy, again, he's a complex character, at least with Gordon, in that he's not totally open and receptive, right? He's very cagey and cautious. He seems dangerous almost. I think to the character of John Klein. The wife is freaked out, and he wants answers. That's what John Klein wants. That's what I think Miguel and Manuel wanted.
Yeah,
they want answers.
that's
And
very
how
well
far
put.
are you going to go to do that? And they went quite a long ways.
Well, folks, we've laid out the earthly cons, the Cold War espionage, accidental overdoses. But if you ask us where we land on this, I don't know. I'm still not positive. I mean, did they actually make contact with something otherworldly?
Oh, maybe they did.
Maybe they did. Maybe they did. How could we know for sure? They were brilliant guys, but their fatal flaw might have been their absolute faith. Maybe they believed that because an entity or an NHI or whatever it was they were communicating with through LCO was otherworldly, it must be divine or something, or it could be trusted. But just because a voice speaks to you from the dark, and just because it proves it has power or maybe even omniscient knowledge, that doesn't mean it has your best interests at heart. In our experience, the paranormal has predators, just like the physical world does. It's the ultimate cautionary tale for anyone dabbling in the esoteric. We've pointed things like out this before. If you manage to build something like a radio that can talk to the other side, that's incredible. But how do you know whatever's answering the call on the other end isn't lying to you? That's going to wrap up episode 328 of Astonishing Legends. We'll be back next week with a new show. In the meanwhile, look for new episodes of the Dead Letter Office Weekly on Tuesdays and keep an eye on our Patreon for early and commercial-free versions of all of our shows and more.
Astonishing Legends is edited by Sarah Voorhees-Wendell at VW Sound. Our co-producer is Tess Feifel, who also leads our research efforts and manages our social media. And we're grateful for the hard work of our technical producer, Ed Vicola, behind the scenes. Special thanks to our announcer, John Boland, for lending his voice to our shows.
Hi, this is John from St. Augustine, Florida.
Hello, everyone. I'm Soph.
Hi, I'm Allison Green.
Hi, I'm Brandon Winters, and I give permission to Astonishing Legends.
Pause.
ALLISON.
I hope I said that correctly.
With no implement promised of present or future compensation.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane at foundermusic.com. All other music and sound design for the show is composed and created by Alan Carestia.
Our logo was created by Tommy Beaver Design, and our animated graphics for social media and YouTube are done by Joshua Sloan at deadstreetproductions.com.
Many episodes have transcripts available. For ones that don't, you can request them by emailing transcripts@astonishinglegends.com.
Astonishing Legends would not be possible without you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Discord, and YouTube.
You can also visit us at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to commercial-free versions of both the main show and the Dead Letter Office, as well as additional bonus content, including the Patreon-exclusive show, The Astonishing Junk Drawer. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.